The episode opens with a flashback, capturing the moment Franklin first encounters Irene in a bar. Their meeting is sparked by a serendipitous pool shot that Franklin uses as an opening to engage Irene in conversation. This marks the beginning of their relationship. Leaping ahead about half a century, the narrative catches up with Franklin and Irene, now an elderly couple, deeply in love. Although Irene is confined to a wheelchair, their affection remains strong. Franklin assists her outside, aiming to share a view of the night sky together. They venture to a shed, where a hidden underground tunnel leads them to an unusual door. Upon entering, they find themselves mysteriously elevated to an interstellar viewing platform, as if transported among the stars. Franklin has observed Irene's growing desire to gaze at the stars more frequently over the last year. They visited their special spot a total of 865 times, with visits increasing since Irene's fall the previous year. Attempting to understand her insistence, Franklin finally confesses that he's grown weary of their regular excursions to the stars. He's ready to hand over their secret responsibility to someone else. However, Irene firmly believes that this mystery is theirs alone to decipher. Meanwhile, their neighbor Byron is suspicious that Franklin and Irene are concealing something in their shed, and he's determined to uncover it. The next morning, as they were driving away, Byron hurried to their car, but Franklin, who views him as an irritating busybody, didn't appreciate the intrusion. Later, while attempting to mow his lawn, Franklin brushes him off completely. Back at his house, Byron shares his suspicions with his wife Janine, who advises him to stay out of their neighbor's affairs, insisting it's none of their business. In the car, Irene suggests that Franklin could be friendlier to Byron, but Franklin dismisses the idea. Irene persists, encouraging him to cultivate friendships rather than focusing solely on her. Later, Franklin and Irene visit the hospital. Irene sees her doctor, who plans to run some tests as her symptoms appear to be worsening, although her exact condition remains unspecified. While Irene was with the doctor, Franklin went to run some errands. He then got a call from his granddaughter Denise and ended up going for lunch with her. She's worried about them, having heard from a neighbor that they're roaming around in the middle of the night going for strolls. Franklin passes it off as simply watching the stars, but Denise is not so sure. She's worried and broaches the idea of them leaving the house. Franklin vehemently declines. While Franklin is away, Irene seizes the opportunity to visit an old friend named Sadie at a care home. During her visit, she is disheartened to see Sadie's deteriorating mental state. Feeling the need to confide in someone, Irene shares her secret with Sadie, explaining that she's been on special journeys but is also grappling with a serious illness. When Franklin returns to pick her up, they both look visibly exhausted, the relentless march of time eroding their mental faculties. This is particularly evident with Franklin, who is showing signs of senility, forgetting essential tasks such as refueling the car and picking up Irene from the doctor's office. At their home, Byron is proudly showing Janine his new campaign sign, excited about his run for councilman. Janine suggests he could delay his campaign until next year, but Byron is eager to start immediately. After their conversation, Byron sneaks over to Irene and Franklin's house to snoop around. While investigating, he receives a text from Janine, prompting him to leave abruptly. Back at home, the conversation turns to the inevitability of death. Irene encourages Franklin to embrace life fully and consider moving on from their home should she pass away before him. After spending a pleasant evening together, Franklin begins to sing to Irene, but soon falls asleep. However, Irene is restless and ready to take action. She writes a note for Franklin, expressing her decision to take control of her situation while she still has the ability. In the note, she promises to see him again and leaves it by the chair as she prepares to leave the house. Irene intends to visit the Martian landscape on her own, a place they've often traveled to together. Just as she is about to leave, she discovers someone lying on the floor, struggling to breathe and desperately seeking her help. The next morning, Franklin is awakened by the sight of Irene crawling toward the house, breathing heavily. She urgently tells him that there's someone in the shed. With concern, Franklin grabs a hammer for protection and goes to investigate. Downstairs, he discovers a stranger doubled over in pain. Franklin immediately assumes the man is a junkie seeking refuge, but Irene senses something more troubling. Adding to the mystery, the man is covered in blood without any visible wounds. Concerned, Franklin decides to call the police. Officer Thomas soon arrives at the scene. He conducts a thorough check of the premises to ensure there are no immediate threats. Meanwhile, the camera subtly focuses on Franklin's back, revealing a patch of blood spatter on his right shoulder, a result of him carrying the bloodied stranger. As Officer Thomas prepares to inspect the upper floor, Irene pulls him aside for a private conversation. She confides in him that Franklin's mental state is deteriorating and that he might be seeing things that aren't there. Her intervention convinces the officer, and he leaves the property under the assumption that the incident was a hallucination on Franklin's part. Meanwhile, the narrative introduces another subplot featuring Stella and her daughter, Tony. They are far from the urban hustle. in the serene mountains leading llamas across the vast, rolling hills, a stark contrast to the urban school environment Tony usually frequents. That evening, Tony welcomes Matthias to their house, believing this could be the beginning of a new friendship. However, unbeknownst to her, Matthias has an ulterior motive. He reveals that he was dared to visit what is rumored to be a haunted house and was offered 4,000 pesos to step inside, casting a shadow over their budding interaction. The local rumors swirling around Tony's grandfather's involvement in cultish activities have piqued the curiosity of the local kids, including Matthias. This revelation devastates Tony, who had mistakenly believed that Matthias's visit was the beginning of a romantic interest. When Stella arrives and finds Tony with Matthias, she quickly intervenes and shoos him away. After dealing with the situation, Stella takes a secretive path to the back of an old church nearby. There, hidden from plain view, is a door that strikingly resembles the one found in Franklin and Irene's shed, suggesting a deeper, mysterious connection between the two locations. Back to Franklin and Irene, as the situation at their home becomes more dire, the stranger on their floor suddenly passes out and starts convulsively shaking. Irene, recognizing the symptoms from a past experience, suspects it could be related to a virus she once battled. She quickly sends Franklin out to get a refill of Tamiflu, hoping it might help. While Franklin is away, Irene takes the opportunity to sift through the stranger's belongings. She finds numerous gold coins and a photograph labeled Gabriel, suggesting a possible identity or connection. With the man coughing uncontrollably and in obvious distress, Irene decides to take matters into her own hands. She prepares a homemade remedy she hopes will alleviate his symptoms and begins to read aloud from a book she found among his possessions, trying to soothe him with her voice. Byron, eager to gather support for his councilman campaign, is out trying to collect signatures from the locals, but he's finding it difficult to get any cooperation. Spotting Franklin entering the pharmacy, Byron seizes the opportunity and approaches him for his signature. However, Franklin declines and hurries inside the pharmacy. Inside, Franklin encounters a new pharmacist who isn't familiar with him or his prescription history. To ensure everything is in order, the pharmacist decides to call the doctor for verification before dispensing any medication. The doctor, wanting to discuss the situation directly, asks to speak with Franklin. This unexpected complication adds another layer to Franklin's already stressful day. Stella, unable to find Tony inside their house, grows anxious and decides to search for her by car. She eventually locates Tony and decides to take her to a restaurant to talk and give her advice over a meal. Tony expresses her feelings of isolation and the mockery she faces from peers because of the mysterious reputation of their house. Stella responds by hinting at a deeper family secret, explaining that every family member is a guardian of something significant, and assures Tony that she will understand her role when the time is right. Their conversation is abruptly interrupted when Stella receives a notification that the alarm at their house has been triggered. Alarmed, they rush back home to check on the situation. Meanwhile, back at Franklin and Irene's place, the stranger regains consciousness and introduces himself as Jude. He's uncertain of his origins, but believes he might be from the mountains. Jude also recalls being carried, which Irene and Franklin assume must have been Franklin's doing, though Franklin has no memory of it. Upon returning with the Tamiflu, Franklin displays a cautious demeanor toward Jude. Unlike Irene, who shows concern and willingness to help, Franklin is reticent and distant, focusing more on Irene as she starts to feel woozy and faint, indicating his primary concern remains her well-being. Denise, who is struggling to stay alert during her lecture, is fortunately assisted by a fellow student named Cliff, who offers her a cup of coffee. This small gesture leads to a connection between the two. They went out for a drink, and she told him about her family, but that was not entirely the truth. She told him she has taken on the significant responsibility of looking after Franklin and Irene. He asked why her father couldn't do it, but she brushed it off, saying he is busy. Meanwhile, a tense conversation unfolds between Franklin and Irene. Franklin confronts Irene about a secret she's been keeping concerning Dr. Maurice's advice. Irene agrees to follow the doctor's instructions, but in return she asks for Franklin's support as she continues to investigate the mysterious doorway and its significance. Although hesitant, Franklin begrudgingly agrees to support her quest. After receiving the notification of the alarm, Stella returns home with a gun, only to discover that an old friend has broken into her house. The intruder questions whether Stella is training Tony, hinting at a connection to the same mysterious elements tied to the doorway. That night, after Franklin has warned Jude not to harm Irene, Jude finds himself unable to sleep. As Denise and Cliff are about to depart, she tells him that she had lied in their conversation earlier, and she told him about her personal challenges, including the emotional weight of her father's voluntary death when she was just 5 years old. Jude quietly takes Irene's letter and stealthily moves through the house. Jude's actions take a startling turn when he retreats to the bathroom with a knife. There, he carefully cuts into his leg, revealing a strange cylindrical cylindrical object embedded beneath his skin. It appears to be some kind of tracking device. Understanding the implications of being tracked, Jude decisively crushes the device, ensuring it can no longer function. After dealing with the device, he slips out into the night. Franklin delves into the mystery of the gold coins he found among the stranger's belongings. He takes them to a local trader who identifies them as Spanish doubloons, but the exact origin of their minting remains uncertain. Simultaneously, Stella confronts the intruder she found in her home. She sends Tony out and questions him about his presence. He responds by handing her a paper, describing it as a special assignment, and insists that she involve Tony. Meanwhile, Franklin, showing a gesture of care, returns home with a bag of clothes for Jude, the stranger who recently revealed his name. However, he specifically avoids giving Jude any of Michael's belongings, as the memories associated with them are still painfully fresh. Responding to Jude's simple request for food, they all head to a diner. The outing takes an uncomfortable turn when Jude becomes ill and vomits during the ride home. Denise is presented with a significant opportunity by her superior Mark. She's been invited to join a newly forming research group which promises a substantial salary increase but also requires a hefty time commitment. This new role would not only be a step up in her career but would also demand she manage it alongside her ongoing internship, essentially doubling her workload. Faced with the potential benefits and the daunting prospect of increased stress, Denise feels torn and unsure about whether to accept the offer. Throughout these events, fragments of Jude's past begin to surface in his mind. He recalls snippets of his life before arriving at the Yorks, including a conflict with another individual. Byron comes under fire for forging signatures on his campaign. He received a call, and he was told to put his campaign in suspension to not face legal matters. Franklin, acting on Irene's suggestion, takes Jude out for some male bonding in an attempt to better understand the mysterious guest. They spend the day playing chess, a setting that gives Franklin ample time to evaluate Jude's character and intentions. Despite the shared activity, Franklin's suspicions grow, and he concludes that Jude might be a con artist. Convinced that it's best for Jude to leave, Franklin decides to give him $5,000 to help him on his way and drives him to the bus station. However, as Jude prepares to board the bus, Franklin begins to have second thoughts about his decision. The complexity of the situation and perhaps a sense of unresolved doubt lead Franklin to reluctantly invite Jude back, allowing him another chance to prove his intentions and possibly clarify his mysterious connection to their family. At home, Irene makes a startling discovery among Jude's possessions, a mysterious orb that seems to have the ability to disintegrate matter. When she places it on the coffee table, the table vanishes without a trace, leaving her both amazed and alarmed. Meanwhile, Denise decides to visit her grandparents and encounters Jude, who they introduce as their new caretaker. Denise is skeptical of Jude, especially given the peculiar circumstances of his arrival and the strange incidents surrounding him. Although Irene suggests that Denise should head home rather than stay the night, Denise leaves, but not without instructing Jude on her grandparents' needs and expectations. She opts to stay with a friend, driven by a resolve to uncover Jude's true identity. Later that night, Jude has a private conversation with Irene. He confides that he believes his presence at their home is no coincidence. Jude reveals that he is searching for his father, named Gabriel, the same name on the Polaroid found earlier, and he seeks Irene's assistance in this personal quest. In another part of the house, Franklin discovers a bloodied knife in the bathroom. While cleaning up, he notices fragments of the mysterious orb that Irene had found, now broken and swirling up through the sink. Unfortunately, the water quickly washes them away before Franklin can examine them further, deepening the mystery of the strange object and its capabilities. Byron, undeterred by previous accusations of meddling, finds himself unable to resist the lure of the mysterious activities at the Yorks' residence. Driven by curiosity, he sneaks into their property and makes his way to the shed. Inside, he navigates through the clutter until he confronts the secret door, the very threshold that seems to be the heart of the enigmas surrounding Franklin and Irene. Meanwhile, the narrative shifts back to Stella and Tony. In a parallel scene reminiscent of earlier discoveries, Stella takes Tony to a secretive doorway located behind the chapel, a portal similar to the one in the Yorks' shed, but with a distinct feature. This doorway is equipped with a strange control panel that Stella manipulates to set their destination. After entering a sequence of commands, Stella and Tony step through the doorway and find themselves instantly transported to New York City. The scene unfolds with Jude awakening from a distressing nightmare where he's embroiled in a fierce fight with another man. Shaken, he decides to take the mysterious orb he discovered earlier and buries it outside to keep it safe. As he is digging, Byron appears, asserting that this is a private area. Jude, claiming his role as the caretaker, brushes off Byron's curiosity and leaves without divulging any further information. Meanwhile, Franklin's suspicions about Jude continue to deepen, especially after finding the bloodied knife. Determined to uncover Jude's true identity, Franklin visits Officer Thomas, hoping to persuade him to conduct a DNA test on the knife. However, Thomas dismisses the need for such measures, viewing Franklin's elaborate theories as further evidence of his deteriorating mental state. In another part of town, Jude and Irene visit a library where Jude searches through records and discovers that his father had been arrested due to homelessness and claimed amnesia at the time of his arrest. When Irene shares this information with Franklin, he responds with a lighthearted joke, suggesting that forgetfulness must run in Jude's family. Elsewhere, Stella and Tony are navigating their own mysterious venture with a contact named Nick. He leads them to an abandoned warehouse where a machine starts emitting what appears to be serial numbers. Nick explains that while he can help narrow down their search, he will need to accompany them to accurately pinpoint the source of the signal. Throughout this ordeal, Tony remains confused and uncertain about the overarching purpose of their mission, highlighting her struggle to grasp the full scope of their enigmatic activities. Denise finds a temporary respite from her demanding schedule by staying at her friend Katie's place. She wakes up there one morning and opens up about the extreme stress she's been under lately, finding comfort in sharing her struggles with a friend. Back at Irene and Franklin's home, tensions rise to a breaking point. Franklin, increasingly troubled by the unfolding events, accuses Irene of favoring Jude over him. Despite Irene's attempts to clarify her intentions and reassure him, Franklin remains skeptical about the situation and abruptly leaves the house, overwhelmed by doubt and frustration. In a parallel scenario, Byron, who has been actively campaigning for a council seat, reaches a moment of disillusionment. In a symbolic gesture of giving up on his political aspirations, he burns all his campaign signs. As he does this, he notices Franklin driving away. Byron tries to offer a friendly smile and greeting, but the moment is fleeting. After Franklin's departure, Irene confronts Jude about his secretive demeanor. She expresses her concerns about him not sharing details of his life, to which Jude responds with a pained smile, acknowledging her care despite his reticence. Chandra, a nurse who previously worked in the caretaker's house, arrives at Irene and Franklin's home under the guise of offering her freelance services. She reveals that she's now freelancing, though in reality, she was fired for stealing. When Irene informs her that Jude has taken over caretaker duties, Chandra asks to use the bathroom, handing Irene her business card to distribute to any friends in need of her services. However, seizing the opportunity, she sneakily enters Jude's room after her bathroom visit and steals something from him. Meanwhile, Jude handles a phone call with Dale from the pawnbrokers, who speaks about the significant value of the gold coins associated with Jude. Jude, pretending to be Franklin's son during the call, is visibly unsettled by the conversation about the coin's value. After the call, Jude contacts someone, possibly seeking advice or information about the coins. The conversation is cryptic, with the person on the other end uttering Fiat voluntas Dei, which translates to God's will be done, suggesting a deeper, possibly religious or philosophical significance to the coins. Shortly after, Irene comes by to pay Jude for his work and reassures him of her support, irrespective of the mystery surrounding him. However, after Chandra's earlier visit, Jude discovers that an item, a rectangular slab previously hinted at, is missing from his belongings. He quickly connects the theft to Chandra, snatches her business card from the dresser, and heads to the local bar, presumably to track her down and retrieve his stolen item. At a local bar, a series of unexpected encounters and revelations unfold. Jude, who is trying to track down Chandra, ends up at the same bar where Denise and her friend Katie are unwinding. Denise approaches Jude, and they strike up a lively interaction involving shots and dancing. Meanwhile, Byron finds himself in a pool hall where he unexpectedly runs into Franklin. The two begin playing pool, and Byron confronts Franklin about a recent campaign stunt, suspecting Franklin had tipped off the authorities. Franklin firmly denies these allegations, and despite an initially frosty interaction, the two men find common ground. Franklin confides his fears about Irene's feelings toward him, while Byron shares his own personal struggles about feeling like a second choice to his wife, Janine, whom he describes as a consolation prize. Their conversation deepens, and both men, now heavily intoxicated, step outside the bar. Here, Byron admits he may have misjudged Franklin and probes about the mysterious doorway. Franklin, trying to dismiss it as merely a bomb shelter, is finally persuaded by Byron's persistence to show him the site. However, when they reach the supposed transportive shelter, it fails to operate, leaving Byron to laugh it off as a hoax, thinking it's just a bizarre construction. Simultaneously, Irene wakes to find Jude missing and decides to drive out to find him. As she searches, Jude, leaving the bar, is stopped by the police. The confrontation triggers traumatic memories of a past altercation where he had to defend himself, explaining the previously noted blood. As Irene drives past, she sees Jude face down on the hood of a police car, being detained, a sight that shocks and worries her about his fate. In the police station, Irene confronts a distressed Jude, who has run off and now finds himself entangled in a legal predicament. Urging him to be honest, Irene demands the truth if she is to help him. Jude, finally opening up, reveals that he was held in an isolated compound designed to guard the secret of the doorway, an enigmatic portal leading to what he describes as a barren alien planet, not the symbolic gateway others might believe it to be. Jude further explains that the blood found on him was from an altercation with men who tried to prevent his escape from the compound. The stakes are high, as these individuals, should they find him, intend to kill him. Jude's ultimate mission is to locate Gabriel, who had previously ventured through the same mysterious doorway. With this newfound understanding, Irene manages to persuade the police to release Jude. On their way home, Irene attempts to downplay the significance of her own doorway. However, Jude insists that their doorway is part of a larger destiny, making it one of the most crucial portals among many. Meanwhile, the subplot with Tony, Stella, and Nick sheds light on the scientific and mystical dimensions of the doorways. They discover that the doorways are connected by invisible particles that span vast distances. While Stella views this phenomenon as a divine gift, Nick adheres to a scientific interpretation. Their quest to locate a specific package leads them to a massive transmission tower. Nick breaks into the network to pinpoint the package's location. However, their operation is nearly compromised when a utility worker arrives. Thinking quickly, Stella subdues the worker, securing him to his van's steering wheel with cable ties, thus ensuring their mission continues uninterrupted. As Nick and Tony proceed to their next destination in Illinois, Tony remains quiet, still processing the events from earlier. Meanwhile, Denise visits Irene and Franklin's house while they are at the doctor's, intending to return a jacket Franklin left at the bar. During her visit, she casually inquires about Jude's father, sparking a light-hearted response from him. Their interaction is interrupted by Irene, who returns with positive news from the doctor. Franklin takes a proactive step towards proving the existence of the alien landscape by handing Byron a disposable camera with undeveloped photos and urging him to get them developed as proof. In another subplot, Irene and Jude visit Chandra's place to recover the items she took. While Irene distracts Chandra with fabricated concerns about Jude, he sneaks upstairs and finds both the strange black trinket and a necklace containing a similar device to what was on his leg. Confronting Chandra, she defensively claims the items were gifts from those at the care home. Irene, seeking further information, promises to keep Chandra's secret in exchange for the source of the necklace. This revelation links the necklace to the tracking devices, explaining why Jude was so keen to destroy the one in his leg. Byron, having developed the photos, finds evidence of the alien world, capturing images of Irene and Franklin in that setting. Meanwhile, Stella, in a distressing episode in the woods, experiences flashbacks of her mother's death, adding emotional depth and backstory to her character. Byron's curiosity leads him to research conspiracy theories online, where he discovers a reference to the impossible door, a concept sketched by an Argentine missionary in 1723, which he connects to their mysterious doorway. Back at the doorway, Franklin and Byron inspect the area and notice bloody fingerprints on the control panel, the same type found at Stella's portal. Upon opening the control panel, they realize the orb is missing, which Jude had previously buried. Byron, piecing together clues from his observations in the woods, locates the buried jar and recovers the orb, further entangling himself in the mysteries surrounding the doorway and its secrets. The scene opens with a strained atmosphere at the dinner table, where Irene casually discusses teaching Jude how to drive. Franklin, however, remains detached from the conversation, his disinterest culminating in him excusing himself to take out the trash. During this mundane chore, he stumbles upon a letter from Irene, the contents of which shake his very foundations. Confronted with his feelings, Franklin accuses Jude mood of bringing turmoil into their home. Jude's retort, questioning the true source of the household's issues, leaves Franklin even more unsettled, prompting him to walk away from the confrontation. Meanwhile, in Illinois, Tony and Stella settle into a motel for the night. The situation escalates when Nick, having brought the orb with him, carelessly plays with it in the presence of a hired companion. Stella intervenes, dismissing the hooker and sternly reminding Nick of the peril they face, citing the tragic fate of his brother as a grim warning. Elsewhere, Byron, brimming with excitement, catches up with Franklin to discuss his discovery of the orb. However, Franklin, overwhelmed by personal troubles, dismissively informs Byron that he's preoccupied with other matters. In a significant turn of events, Denise decides to quit school, a decision that has been looming for several chapters. Her friend reacts negatively, driving Denise to leave and join Jude on his quest. Jude shares new details about his father, Gabriel, who similarly had to cut a tracker out of his leg after escaping shadowy pursuers. Returning to the domestic front, Franklin, after spending a night at Byron's, confronts Irene about the discovered letter and her perceived broken promises. The confrontation underscores the deep fractures in their marriage, revealing a relationship in crisis. Concurrently, Byron attempts to operationalize the orb by placing it in the control panel in the basement shed. Despite his efforts, the mechanism fails to activate due to insufficient power. Tensions between Nick and Stella continue to simmer, with Nick provocatively mentioning Stella's late brother, Caleb. Stella reacts violently, punching Nick and leaving him with a bloody nose as she takes off with the van, stranding him at the motel. Jude, driven by the quest to trace his father's footsteps, decides to embark on a road trip to a remote area in Michigan. Denise, eager for the journey and the stories it may uncover, joins him. Irene, seeking a sense of adventure and perhaps a new purpose beyond her routine life, decides to accompany them, despite Franklin's decision to stay behind. For Franklin, their marriage and the life they built together have always been sufficient, but Irene yearns for more, highlighting a growing divide between their desires and aspirations. Back at home, Franklin handles unexpected business regarding the Spanish doubloons. He receives a call from Dale, the pawnbroker, who is eager to learn more about the origin of these rare coins. Franklin is bewildered, especially since it was Jude who initially dealt with Dale about the coins. Unable to provide answers and feeling confused, Franklin hangs up. This interruption is timely, as Byron urgently summons him to show him something new. Byron leads Franklin to the basement of the shed, where he has set up a large generator. His plan is to charge the circuitry connected to the doorway, hoping to provide enough power to activate it. They proceed with the setup, and the activation causes a massive surge of energy. The blast sends shockwaves through the neighborhood, disrupting electrical systems and affecting the natural environment, evidenced by flickering lights and birds dropping from the sky. Simultaneously, Stella and Tony, who had been tracking related anomalies, receive a precise ping on their equipment indicating the location they need to head towards, spurred by the energy surge from the doorway. In the shed's basement, the power-up is successful, and Franklin and Byron find themselves transported to the alien viewpoint. They are greeted by a breathtakingly beautiful vista, a stark contrast to the mundane world they've left behind. Overwhelmed by the beauty and the surreal experience, Byron expresses a desire to explore further, but this time, Franklin, who has previously been apprehensive about such adventures, admits that he is no longer afraid. This moment marks a significant personal breakthrough for Franklin, reflecting his readiness to embrace the unknown. Franklin reveals to Byron the spacesuits he's been designing for years, but never had the courage to use. Inspired, Byron vows to help make them functional. Meanwhile, Irene, Jude, and Denise arrive in Michigan at the home of a woman named Hannah, who recognizes Gabriel from a Polaroid Jude shows her. She explains that she and Gabriel were once romantically involved, but he disappeared 15 years ago without a trace. Feeling their trip might be futile, Irene considers heading back, but Hannah persuades them to stay overnight. That evening, Irene hears a suspicious noise upstairs, but is reassured by Hannah that it's nothing. Unknown to the guests, Hannah enters a hidden room where a man named Paul is monitoring everything. They discuss making contact with Franklin after Paul plays a voicemail from him about the coins. Back home, Byron skips Janine's barbecue to focus on his project with Franklin. During a tense conversation, Janine admits she reported Byron's campaign forgery out of a desire for a simpler life, revealing a deep rift between their aspirations. Denise confronts Irene, feeling pushed away, and Irene admits she feels guilty about Michael's past struggles, believing she doesn't deserve Denise's love. Overcome with emotion, Irene apologizes, and they share a heartfelt embrace, understanding each other better through flashbacks of Michael's depression. Meanwhile, Tony finds a video of Jude singing karaoke Loki, which leads Stella to confirm that Jude is the apostate they've been looking for. Tony calls Nick for help in tracing Jude's steps. On another front, Byron and Franklin test the spacesuits they've been working on. Byron explores the alien landscape, excitedly communicating back to Franklin until he goes silent after claiming to have found something incredible. Left alone, Franklin fears the worst, struggling with guilt and concern over Byron's sudden disappearance. Irene takes Denise into the shelter to explain the turmoil she's been experiencing. She shares that after Michael's voluntary death, she struggled to find a reason to continue living and hoped the portal might help her cope with her grief. Irene confesses that her intention was to shield Denise from the portal's complexities, but Jude's arrival has caused events to spiral out of control. Feeling betrayed by the deception, Denise walks away, upset by the revelations. Meanwhile, Tony and Stella encounter Chandra and a sinister man on the shore. The man exchanges gold doubloons worth much more than the $3,000 Chandra demands for information about Jude. After obtaining what he needs, the man abruptly kills Chandra, retrieves the doubloons, and warns that he will ensure Stella remains tough. He then sets Chandra and her car on fire, leaving Tony to witness the horrifying scene from a distance. Jude panics upon realizing the orb is missing from the garden. Meanwhile, Franklin searches for Byron on the observatory deck, but finds no trace of him, leaving both men distressed. Janine, worried, questions Franklin about her husband's whereabouts, but he reassures her without giving specifics. Inside, Jude confronts Franklin about the dangers of their endeavor, explaining that there's nothing but wasteland on the alien planet. Stella and Tony discuss their predicament, with Stella admitting they can't escape the man pursuing them. As the man leads Tony to the York house, noticing dead birds signals they're close, he reveals to Tony that Caleb is her father, not Stella's brother. At the garden, Tony finds Franklin held at gunpoint and forced inside. Meanwhile, Jude thanks Denise for her help at the bar, but their chat is cut short when Stella starts shooting, causing Jude to flee into the woods. Denise returns to the York house and finds herself and her grandparents also at gunpoint. The stranger coerces Irene into revealing the doorway's location, then heads to the shed. Irene comforts a distraught Tony, who doubts their mission and condemns their actions, citing Chandra's death as a stark contradiction to their supposed divine mission. The stranger alters his plans and informs Stella, using the family as leverage to capture Jude, known as the apostate. Upon his arrival, Jude is assaulted by the man, hinted to have been sent by an unidentified woman, though details remain vague. During a scuffle, Franklin manages to overpower the stranger, who is then tasered, bound, and gagged. Stella and Tony, with the captive in tow, leave their old lives behind, driven away with a new bargaining chip. Simultaneously, Jude and Denise decide to escape through the doorway to Bangkok, distancing themselves from the chaos. Irene resolves to limit their use of the mysterious doorway, dismissing its once-thought potential, which Franklin accepts with a mix of relief and determination to resolve unfinished business regarding Byron's fate. As Stella and Tony are ambushed and forced off the road by Hannah and her associates, the tension escalates. Hannah confronts Cornelius, the bound stranger, intensifying the conflict. Meanwhile, the couple embarks on another journey to an unknown alien planet. However, Franklin experiences a system failure in his oxygen supply, causing him to lose consciousness. Irene follows him, bravely entering the alien environment without a spacesuit to help him. It turns out the atmosphere of this planet is suitable for human life. She removes her husband's helmet, and together they discover an ancient city beyond the hill. It turns out that guardians of humanity have been living here for about 100,000 years. They are the ones who built hundreds of quantum portals on Earth and many other planets. This is where the first season ends. We were left with a setup for the second season, but unfortunately the series was cancelled. A human hand in a black glove injects some substance into the yolk of an egg, and after a few minutes, it divides, producing an identical egg. At the same time, on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a star for Oscar winner Elizabeth Sparkle is unveiled. Time passes, the star fades, and soon Sparkle's name no longer shines as brightly. She herself now hosts an aerobics TV show. Despite her age, the woman is fit and looks quite good. However, one day she goes to the restroom, and seeing that the women's restroom is out of order, she enters the men's room. Inside a stall, she hears the voice of the show's producer, Harvey, saying that Elizabeth is outdated and the show needs a young and hot girl. It's time for Sparkle to retire. After all, her Oscar was won at the dawn of cinematography, and it's time to make way for the younger generation. Upset, Elizabeth goes to lunch with the producer, where he laughingly announces her retirement and leaves with a friend. The woman sees a fly in her wine glass and feels just as helpless. On her way home, the actress gets distracted by workers taking down her billboard, and she gets into an accident. In the hospital, the doctor recognizes the star and compliments her, but the woman starts crying because all her fame is now behind her. Embarrassed, the doctor says goodbye and leaves. However, a young nurse suddenly starts examining Elizabeth's back, muttering that she is perfect for an experiment. Before leaving, he slips a flash drive into her pocket with a commercial for a product called Substance. Elizabeth reads the name of the product when an older man calls out to her. It turns out to be her old classmate, Fred. He is happy to see her and offers to meet and reminisce about their youth. Fred writes his phone number on a random scrap of paper, and after soaking it in a puddle, he hands it to Elizabeth, who pretends to be happy to see her old friend. In reality, she falls into a deep depression, especially after she finds a bouquet at home, thanking her for being part of the team all these years. Rereading the word "was," Elizabeth inserts the flash drive into the TV and watches a commercial for a substance whose injection unlocks her DNA and initiates cell division, creating another version of herself. This is the substance, and the person is the Matrix. And while they are two different personalities, they are still the same person, just an improved version that will be younger, more beautiful, and more perfect. Both personalities must exist in symbiosis and switch every 7 days, always remembering that they are one whole. Elizabeth goes to a bar and, watching the happy couples, realizes her loneliness. She returns home and, after long thoughts and memories, she calls the number provided and orders the substance. She is given a postbox number where she can pick up the product, and the call is quickly ended. The woman spends a sleepless night, and in the morning, she sees an ad in the newspaper looking for candidates to replace her as the host of the show. At the same time, there's a letter in the mail with a card and the postbox number for the substance. Elizabeth resolutely heads to pick up the package. Using the card, she opens a hidden door in an old building and finds a storage unit with a package waiting for her. At home, Elizabeth opens the box. All the substance ingredients are neatly packed in bags and labeled activator, stabilizer, the other you, the switch, food for the Matrix, food for the other you. The activator only needs to be used once, but the stabilizer must be administered daily, and it's taken from the Matrix cells. Most importantly, the pair must switch places every 7 days without exception, and they must always remember that they are one whole. In the morning, Elizabeth spends a long time staring at herself in the mirror, noting the signs of aging. Eventually, she injects the one-time activator, after which she is struck by unbearable pain. The woman falls to the floor, writhing in agony as her back splits open, and from within emerges her younger version. This new personality gradually comes to her senses, and upon looking in the mirror, she sees the reflection of a young and very beautiful girl. For a while, she revels in her new state, but then she notices Elizabeth's body. First, the girl tidies it up, stitching up the horrible tear in her back. Then she goes to her bed. In the morning, the girl takes a shower, and suddenly she feels unwell. She pulls out special syringes and injects herself with the stabilizer, drawn from the spine of the unconscious Matrix, Elizabeth. Then she goes to the living room, delighted with her new, young, and strong body. Later, the girl goes to a casting call, buying a seductive swimsuit along the way. She takes the name Sue and has a stunning effect on the producer's assistants and eventually on Harvey himself. Sue is chosen to replace Elizabeth as the show's host, although the girl immediately warns that every 7 days she will leave to care for her sick mother. This completely wins over Harvey, as the audience will surely love it. Sue begins to enjoy the fame that once belonged to the original version. However, the week flies by, and it's time for the switch. Sue attaches special tubes to her arms, allowing the substance to flow through. Soon Elizabeth comes to, while Sue's body slips into a coma. The woman cleans herself up and goes to the TV studio, where Harvey presents her with a gift from the crew. Back home, Elizabeth marks the days when she can be herself on her calendar. She spends all her time at home. At the end of the week, she receives a message about a new batch of substance delivered to her postbox. After 7 days, they switch again. Sue enjoys her new life, starring in commercials and reveling in her growing popularity. But one day, she starts thinking about the Matrix body and sets up a secret room in the bathroom. Just as she finishes, her neighbor knocks on the door, complaining about the noise from the tools. Seeing Sue, the man is immediately smitten and offers his help, but the girl slams the door and hides Elizabeth's body in the secret room, then replaces her portrait on the wall with her own. Sue's show becomes wildly successful, with the ratings soaring, much to the producer's delight. The girl starts making new friends and attending parties. One evening, she brings a young man home, but when things get intimate, she suddenly feels unwell and remembers that it's time for the switch. Sue rushes to the secret room and performs an additional stabilization procedure. She spends the night with the young man and switches with Elizabeth later than necessary. When Elizabeth wakes up, she finds a living room in disarray and her hands twisted with gout. Struggling to put herself together, she calls the substance provider's number, but they inform her that the changes are irreversible and remind her not to forget that they are one whole. Elizabeth tidies up the apartment and then sees a recording of Sue's new show on TV. She is forced to admit that Sue is very beautiful. Later, she hears the neighbor asking Sue for a date, but she doesn't answer the door. Then she receives a new batch of substance. On her way out, she stops at a cafe where an old man starts a conversation, lamenting that 7 days is too long to wait to return to one's body. He drops his cards, and among them, Elizabeth sees a card identical to her substance card. She recognizes the young nurse who advised her on the experiment in his eyes. He knows that with each time, it becomes harder to remember that you deserve the right to exist. Soon the second part will literally start consuming her. Elizabeth runs home, bumping into Sue's boyfriend, who of course doesn't recognize her. But this makes her remember Fred. She dials his number, and her ecstatic classmate arranges a meeting at a cafe. Elizabeth dresses up, puts on makeup, and hides her hands under gloves. But unexpectedly, she sees a billboard with Sue on it. Her own reflection immediately disappoints her, and she changes her makeup, then wipes it off entirely. Crying, she rips off her dress and stays home, ignoring Fred's persistent calls, binge eating to cope with her stress and insecurity. When it's Sue's turn again, she steps onto the set and begins the show. However, during the exercises, she suddenly feels something protruding beneath the skin of her buttocks. The girl immediately halts the filming, and while the puzzled cameraman tries to understand what he just shot, she runs to the bathroom, where she finds a lump on her rear and pulls out a fried chicken leg from her navel. She realizes that while she is living an active life, Elizabeth is binge eating at home. Sue is furious. She complains to the substance operator, but all she hears in return is, "They are one whole." Weeks go by. One day, Sue urgently summons Harvey to announce that she will be the new host of their New Year's show, the pinnacle of her career. Sue is overjoyed. However, she is now abusing the stabilizer more and more, which causes Elizabeth's body to age rapidly. When Elizabeth wakes up again, she finds herself old and decrepit, with stiff joints and almost entirely gray hair. The woman calls the substance operator, and he suggests ending the experiment, but there is no way to restore her condition now. She tries to convince herself to stop the experience, but she can't give up such a beautiful second version of herself, even though her knees barely function. She remembers Harvey's gift. It turns out to be a cookbook, and Elizabeth throws herself into learning new recipes with renewed energy, while Sue continues to dominate the TV screens. One day, Elizabeth hears Sue laughing at her, mocking the aging star, which drives her to eat even more. Elizabeth becomes so enraged that she vows to end the experiment. The day for the switch comes, and once again, Sue finds a room full of leftovers and empty bottles. To gain independence and take advantage of the Matrix helplessness, Sue stockpiles stabilizers for 3 months. However, the day before the live broadcast of the show, the stabilizer runs out. Sue calls the supplier to ask for more, but he says Elizabeth is the only source, and they need to switch to replenish the supply. There is simply no other option. Sue, barely conscious, starts the switch. Her boyfriend hears strange noises coming from the bathroom, but the girl doesn't open the door because inside is now a hideous, bald woman with a deformed hump. Finally, she yells at him, and he runs off. Elizabeth, now a horrific creature, calls the substance operator and begs to end the experiment. Then she heads out for the final batch. Returning home, she drags Sue's body into the living room and prepares to inject her with the serum that will kill her duplicate. With the syringe ready, she looks around, staring at the portraits of Sue for a long time. She realizes she can't kill her young version. Elizabeth brings Sue back to consciousness. Seeing the half-empty syringe and realizing what Elizabeth had intended, Sue flies into a rage, beating her Matrix to death. Afterward, she goes to the New Year's show. She is dressed in a gorgeous gown, but suddenly Sue feels unwell and runs to the bathroom. It turns out that with the Matrix dead, Sue's body begins to rapidly deteriorate. First, her teeth fall out, making it impossible for her to smile for the sponsors, which Harvey so desperately wants. Then a nail falls off, and her ear drops off. In a panic, Sue rushes home where she injects herself with the last of the activator, hoping to create a new version of herself. But instead, a monstrous hybrid of both versions, Eliza Sue, is born. The monster recalls her audition and tries to beautify herself by putting on a dress and a homemade Elizabeth mask before heading to the show. When she arrives at the TV center, she steps onto the stage and addresses the audience, but her mask falls off. Screams of horror fill the hall, and she is called a monster. The audience flees in panic, and one man decapitates Eliza Sue. after which her mutilated body floods the entire hall with blood. What's left of Eliza Sue runs out of the studio, and out on the street, it disintegrates into guts. Elizabeth's original face manages to crawl to the actress's star on the Walk of Fame, where it looks up, smiles, and melts away. The next morning, the remaining puddle of blood is scrubbed away, erasing the memory of the actress. At times funny but mostly terrifying, the film dissects society's imposed standards on women's bodies and the pursuit of eternal beauty, forcing viewers to reflect on what it means to be yourself and how important it is to accept who you are. Humanity sends the first space expedition to Mars, which mysteriously perishes. Rescuers struggle to reach the Red Planet and discover an astonishing find that reveals the secret of the origin of humans and life on Earth.
I don't know what the hell we just did.
A party is held at the house of astronaut Luke Graham in honor of his departure to Mars. Families of his friends and colleagues gather, and the man says goodbye to those staying behind, including his friend Jim McConnell, who had long been preparing for this flight but had to leave the project due to his wife's illness. The friends wish Luke a safe flight and remember the deceased woman. She would have been happy that the mission takes place. In 2020, the first manned expedition arrives on the Red Planet. Soon people discover a strange white formation near the base in the Cydonia region, which they suspect is the extrusion of a layer of water which will be useful for future human colonization. Transmitting the news of the find to the command center aboard the International Space Station, 4 crew members head to the location of the formation for further research. Arriving on site, people see a tall mountain which radar identifies as metallic. Then the astronauts begin to hear a strange low sound, but they think is just interference from their Mars rover. And when they increase the power of their equipment, the sand beneath their feet starts to move. At first, this doesn't cause much concern. The astronauts stay in place, examining the mountain, above which a sand whirlwind is growing. But soon it begins to behave like a sentient being, seemingly examining the newcomers and then attacking them, killing 3 astronauts within seconds, and then emitting a powerful electromagnetic pulse, destroying most of the working electronics aboard the ship. After the whirlwind subsides, a huge human face carved out of dense material appears from under the layer of sand. The space station receives an unintelligible message from Luke, but they do not understand what happened and whether Luke is alive. The leadership realizes that the rescue expedition needs to be organized, but how this can be done technically is unclear. Then Jim proposes a solution to the problem, as he had developed plans for evacuation from Mars. The station commander agrees to consider it but opposes Jim's participation in the expedition because the man refused to undergo tests and left the project. Woody Blake insists on including his friend in the crew, as his refusal to go on the first flight was for a good reason. He was very worried about his wife. Moreover, it was he and his wife who studied and designed the flight to Mars. So Jim knows more about this planet than everyone else, which will undoubtedly help in the rescue mission. Hearing his arguments, the commander agrees, and the rescue ship with a team of 4 people heads to Mars. In addition to Woody and Jim, the crew includes specialist Terry Fisher, Woody's wife, and Phil Ohlmeyer. Along the way, Jim kindly envies the love between Woody and Terry, observing how tenderly they treat each other. Soon, the surface of Mars becomes visible from the ship, and people note that the expedition camp is intact, and even see 3 burial mounds next to the building. It is unclear what happened to Luke. Maybe there was simply no one to bury him. Soon, a magnetic storm covers the planet, and the astronauts can no longer see anything. Command gives permission to land. Woody goes to share the news with Jim and catches him watching a family movie from which it becomes clear that his wife was also an astronaut, and together with her husband, they dreamed of flying to Mars. The ship is preparing to enter orbit around the Red Planet, but then a swarm of micrometeorites appears in its path, and one of the meteorites punctures the hull, injuring Phil's arm. The station begins to lose air, and Woody goes into open space to find and fix the breach. However, the breach is so small that it cannot be visually detected, and then Terry squeezes out juice which floats to the hole and seeps through it, indicating the breach. However, the crew does not notice another breach in the fuel line of one of the main engines. When the engine ignites, the fuel displaced into space explodes, destroying the ship. The crew has no choice but to quickly don their spacesuits and venture out into open space, hoping to maneuver to the supply module left in orbit from the first expedition. They find the module, but it is moving on a lower orbit than theirs, and too fast. Woody uses up all the fuel in his rocket bag to reach the module and secures a rope to it. However, he fails to stop his own flight and continues to fall towards Mars. Terry, wanting to save her husband, detaches her rope and goes after him. But Woody, realizing that if she continues to try to save him, she will face certain death, removes his helmet and perishes. Crying, Terry watches her husband's body fall to the planet and then returns to the others. The 3 astronauts land on the planet using the module. Although the module itself will not be able to take off again, the rescuers brought with them new motherboards for the first expedition ship, replacing the burnt-out ones. Upon arriving at the base of the first expedition, they explore it, but find no one. Although the living quarters are completely intact, Jim goes to the greenhouse and is amazed that all the plants are doing well, everything is functioning and working. The astronaut removes his helmet, and in the reflection on the water, he sees Luke with an axe attacking him, not believing that this is a real person, not a vision. The man is seized, and only then does he begin to believe that they have come for him. The astronauts understand that Luke is not entirely mentally stable, as he has spent more than a year on Mars in complete isolation from the world. After recovering from the sandstorm attack, he buried the deceased and began studying the strange structure. He shows the rescue team the video recording of the discovery that cost his crew members their lives, and people are astonished, realizing that they are looking at the face of a humanoid. He then demonstrates his most important find, a recording of the sound he heard near the formation. After several months of analyzing the sound, he understood that it represents a diagram of human DNA on a rectangular coordinate system in space. Someone left it here as their signature. But later, remembering how Phil created the DNA of his ideal lover from candy, Jim realizes that this is not a signature. In reality, it is a peculiar test left by the creators instead of a lock guarding the entrance to somewhere. It turns out that the first expedition perished because they answered incorrectly. Instead of complementing the DNA, proving that they were humans, the astronauts directed radar at the face. Since the answer was wrong, the structure's security system, the sandstorm, destroyed the intruders. The team heads to the Sphinx, but first they send a robot and transmit a signal with the supplemented DNA through it. A bright light shines from an entrance that appears in the face. Everyone except Phil, who stays behind to fix the ship, goes to the face. Jim gives Phil the order to take off at a precisely determined time, even if they don't return. Then the people enter a white room, the door closes, and the astronauts lose contact with the ship. Soon the room fills with Earth's atmosphere, and the people remove their helmets. Immediately behind them, another airlock opens, and upon passing through it, the astronauts find themselves in a dark room where they see a massive 3-dimensional projection of the solar system. Then a hologram of a Martian appears, silently explaining to the people that in the distant past, a massive asteroid struck Mars, destroying the planet's ecosystem, which strongly resembled the Earth's. The Martians had to evacuate their race to other star systems, but they also sent a ship from Mars to neighboring Earth, containing the seeds of future life. Hundreds of millions of years later, multicellular plants and animals appeared on the planet, and no one could explain how it happened. Many years have passed since this panspermia. The new forms that emerged from the sent DNA evolved and became humans. They were supposed to return home to Mars one day so that the Sphinx would recognize them as the descendants of the grandiose experiment. The hologram reaches out to the Earthling, conveying that they belong to the same species. The Martian hologram disappears, and in front of them opens the hatch of a spaceship, on which someone from them can fly to the new home of the Martians. At this time, Phil unsuccessfully tries to contact his friends and prepares for takeoff. The people hear his warning that the storm is getting stronger and will soon engulf the ship. They realize that they need to hurry. But Jim refuses to return to Earth when the opportunity to fly to another galaxy arises. He is sure that this is an invitation and he was born precisely to reach the new world. Jim says goodbye to his friends. Terry gives him a small rocket pendant to remember, which once belonged to Woody, and the astronauts leave. Meanwhile, Phil repeats the call, but not receiving an answer, he hesitates to press the launch button, and Jim enters a light elevator that lifts him onto the Martian ship. The two remaining astronauts barely make it back to the ship due to the sandstorm, and only because Phil, contrary to the order, delays the takeoff. Meanwhile, Jim steps onto a circle that appears before him and suddenly realizes that he can't move as water rises around him. The man braces himself for drowning and holds his breath, but then he takes a breath and starts breathing underwater. He smiles, understanding that this is a new form of life. Images of his past life flash before his eyes, and the man seems to say goodbye to everyone once again. His crew, having taken off, watches through the porthole as the Martian ship with Jim on board flies away at high speed toward a distant galaxy and wishes him a safe journey. This good, kind-hearted science fiction film that was shot many years ago does not stand out for its dynamic plot, but despite numerous scientific inaccuracies, it is interesting to watch and keeps the tension until the last seconds. The year is 4032. Most of humanity has mutated into new creatures called abbeys. In the 21st century, Professor David Pilcher foresaw an unknown mutation in human DNA and built the town of Wayward Pines, which was meant to serve as an ark for the last surviving humans. The chosen ones, those who were destined to restore the human population, were frozen without their consent for 2,000 years. However, upon awakening, not everyone was pleased with life in a city surrounded by a tall fence with millions of monsters lurking outside. Dr. Theo Yedlin is on vacation at the beach. In a bar, he strikes up a conversation with a stranger who, at first glance, doesn't raise any suspicion. But the casual chat ends strangely. Yedlin wakes up several years later to find himself in the town of Wayward Pines. On his way to the hospital, accompanied by a group of strangers, Theo manages to escape. He seeks help at the first house he finds, hoping to call the police, but as he observes the strange behavior of the homeowners, Theo begins to doubt if he's doing the right thing. The police do respond to Yedlin's call, but instead of offering help, they return him to the hands of the strangers. They take Theo to the hospital, and after telling him a story about a government experiment, the people in black ask him to work for the good of society. The kidnappers ask Theo to save a patient who is extremely important to them. After examining the girl, Yedlin promises to do everything possible and instructs them to prepare the operating room while he assesses the seriousness of her injuries. Theo's patient turns out to be Kate. While the doctor operates on the girl, Carrie reports to Jason about losses within the ranks of the first generation. Looking at a photo of his rival, the dictator realizes that as long as Ben is free, their movement in the city are in danger. This is confirmed by Megan, who appears in the room. She reminds him of Pilcher's main rule: clear laws, strict punishment. Theo visits his patient, and she tries to tell him what's really going on. But Carrie doesn't allow the doctor to listen to Kate and instead urges him to take a break. While walking through the town, Theo witnesses soldiers separating a woman from her young son. The doctor tries to intervene but is once again prevented from understanding what's going on and is forced to walk away. However, later Yedlin does learn the woman's fate. She is brought to the central square along with others, accused of rebellion. Jason addresses the cheering crowd, assuring everyone that his cruelty is the path to humanity's salvation. After these words, he executes the woman without any explanation. Megan visits Kate in the hospital room and suggests they unite for the future of Wayward Pines. But Kate attacks her rival, armed with a scalpel. Kate confesses that she will never watch as dictators destroy the world. She raises the scalpel and ends her suffering. Mario brings Theo and other prisoners to the wall. He opens a passage and, after jamming the gas pedal with a rock, sends the vehicle into the lair of the abbeys. The monsters notice the prey but run past, trying to climb over the fence. Members of the first-generation movement watch a motivational video left for them by Pilcher, followed by footage from surveillance cameras showing the abbeys attempting to breach the wall. The creatures sacrifice themselves to create a ramp, allowing their comrades to infiltrate Wayward Pines. Jason realizes something is wrong and orders a squad to gather and check the situation in person. Meanwhile, the prisoners, led by Ben, try to escape from the vehicle, taking advantage of the fact that the monsters are ignoring them. Military vehicles approach the wall and soldiers open fire on the abbeys. But despite this, some creatures manage to leap over the barrier and engage in open combat. The first to be injured is Carrie, and Abby slashes open her stomach, and Jason is forced to leave his subordinates to take his companion to the hospital. Very soon, the leader regrets his decision to get rid of Theo. No one is capable of performing the complex surgery and saving the girl. Jason orders the doctor to be found, and several vehicles must drive beyond the wall. Without resisting, Theo jumps into one of them to avoid falling into the hands of the advancing mutants. The leader of the movement asks Yedlin to perform the operation, but Theo refuses to proceed without an explanation of what's going on. Jason is forced to strike a deal with the doctor, promising to return his wife and revealing that aside from Wayward Pines, there are no other humans. The rest of the planet is overrun by Abbeys. After the surgery, Carrie regains consciousness. Another problem for the town arises: depleted supplies. Jason asks CJ to prepare for the harvest, which is beyond the wall, but the town must prepare carefully for the encounter with the Abbeys. Theo has to come to terms with his new role. He is appointed the head and most likely the only doctor in Wayward Pines. The only thing he disagrees with is the portrait of Pilcher hanging on the wall of his new office. Megan gives a lecture for the teenagers, using an Abbey body to show the mutants' weak points. One of the students admits he knows about the attempted breach, but Megan assures him that the only danger to the town is the rebels. Everything else is under control of the authorities. After examining one of the teenagers, Theo informs Jason of serious issues. Due to the food shortage, the health of the residents is at risk. However, the young dictator doesn't appreciate the doctor's tone or his attempts to change the order in Wayward Pines. CJ prepares a team for the harvest. He suggests using fire as protection against the Abbeys, and after a brief briefing, the vehicles drive beyond the wall to bring back the harvest and save the town. The monsters attack immediately as the harvesters appear, but CJ's plan works. The fire scares off the Abbeys, and the group has some time to gather food. One of the soldiers unexpectedly encounters Ben, but the young man refuses to help his old friend, fearing severe punishment for associating with a rebel. The loaded vehicles leave, and Ben doesn't manage to pass through the open gates. He then stands in front of the camera and addresses Jason, stating that all of the leader's actions are the wrong choice in tyranny. Rumors that Ben is still alive reach his mother. Teresa tries to find out details from the soldiers and persuade them to return for the boy, but no one wants to deal with the troublemakers. Ben continues to hide in the danger zone, hoping to return to Wayward Pines, but a pack of Abbeys attacks the boy, turning him into a hearty meal. Jason checks the cameras and notices that there are no Abbeys in any of the sectors. The leader celebrates, believing he has driven the monsters out and that the town is now completely safe. But it seems the mutants have a different opinion. Several soldiers are sent on a reconnaissance mission, but they spot nothing except a frightened deer. This pleases Jason greatly, as he is convinced the Abbeys have left, but Carrie sees an unpleasant side to this. If Ben isn't found, the leader will have to answer to the town for the death of one of the first generation. At night, voices are heard in Jason's house, and, loading his weapon, the young man goes downstairs. To his surprise, Pam appears before him. The old woman reminds her protege of everything she taught him. She confesses that she killed her brother only because he tried to save the town through dictatorship and violence. Pam asks Jason to let her stay and help him build a truly bright future and save humanity. Jason agrees to forgive the traitor and takes her to the square to announce his decision to the town. Unbeknownst to Jason, Pam sneaks into the lab where the captured Abbeys are kept. Megan arrives shortly after, but the thief manages to leave without revealing her intentions for coming there. Back at home, Pam plans to use a drug she stole from the lab. Her plan is interrupted by Theo's arrival, but the nurse quickly directs him to the door to get what she came for in the hated town. Megan learns of the stolen drug, but it turns out it wasn't a medicine. Pam had taken a smallpox sample. Meanwhile, Pam attends a meeting in Jason's office. She unexpectedly kisses her protege in a way she never had before and joins the conversation. Dr. Yedlin bursts into the room. He orders everyone to leave without touching anything and avoiding contact with people. The doctor then reveals Pam's plans, and the woman doesn't even attempt to resist. Pam admits that, in her opinion, Wayward Pines should be destroyed. She asks Jason to put an end to the story, but the leader orders the traitor to be arrested. At night, Jason goes on a walk with Pam. He asks his mentor to tell him the end of the story about Wayward Pines, but after receiving an answer that wounds his pride, the dictator kills the old woman. A few days after the Abbey attack, Xander finally wakes up at the bottom of a deep well. There, the young man is found by a mutant, but he manages to defeat the monster and climb to the surface. At a meeting on the problems of Wayward Pines, CJ discusses the need to increase the area of crops. The population is growing, but food is becoming scarcer. Carrie and Megan believe it's too early to address this issue, but Jason supports the farmer and allows him to search for new fields. Xander is quietly approached by a man with a knife. He demands that Xander reveal who sent him and who currently rules the town. The savage himself says he has been here for a very long time. He is the only one from the team Pilcher sent to search for other survivors. Guards notice movement near the wall, and a duty squad is dispatched to the scene. The soldiers recognize Xander, accompanied by the stranger, but let them inside without question. The savage is immediately sent to Dr. Yedlin. Theo tries to find out from the patient if there are other people beyond the wall, but the man only says that the Abbeys are not the enemy. They are the replacement meant to take their place. Jason learns the name of the savage, Adam Hassler. He asks the doctor to tell him everything the patient said, but Theo refuses to disclose the confidential information and suggests the leader speak to the survivor personally. Throughout this time, Hassler struggles to recover. He is constantly haunted by nightmares of Abbey attacks he endured during his months beyond the wall. Finally, the man can no longer take it and decides to leave the hospital, fearing that the mutants will get to him there. The savage escapes into the streets, frightening crowds of townspeople. His hallucinations, in which mutants attack him, intensify, forcing him to find shelter in a deserted alley. There, Adam is discovered by Teresa. She recognizes an old acquaintance and tries to find out if he has seen Ben, but the savage hesitates to tell the woman the truth. Theo tells his wife about Adam's words, and Rebecca urges him to inform the town's leadership. The town sends off the first group, who go in search of new lands suitable for settlement and cultivation. Teresa stops CJ's vehicle and asks to join the mission so she can find her son. Hassler also joins the soldiers, having failed to adjust to the peaceful life in town. CJ gazes with excitement at the landscape he hasn't seen in a very long time. He orders the squad to set up camp and prepares for a night outside the wall. Adam leaves without explanation, but later that night he returns, causing a stir in the camp. Hearing the commotion, Rachel wakes up and the soldiers part to reveal what the savage has brought. On the ground lies a covered body, and even before she removes the covering, it becomes clear that Ben is underneath it. Rebecca brings Lucy, the girl she's trying to protect from the harsh rules of Wayward Pines, into her home. Upon learning that the girl is to be placed in the breeding program, Theo becomes furious and supports his wife's decision. Frank, Lucy's brother, feels responsible for her rule-breaking. He escapes from the academy and goes for an evening walk, but in the city center he faces a greater shock, and Abby appears on the town's carousel. The mutant stands tall before the boy, and this is caught on surveillance cameras. Jason orders the main streets to be cordoned off and makes sure no one finds out what's happening. Several armed men come to the boy's aid, but Carrie asks the leader not to destroy this creature. It is the first female Abby they have encountered. Despite attempts to keep the incident a secret, Frank becomes a school hero. Megan studies the new creature and reports to the leadership about the behavioral differences. According to the scientist, the female is much calmer than her counterparts, and the other captive Abbeys have also become more peaceful since her arrival. The doctor also shows the Abbey's palm. It bears a strange pattern, unlike any scars. Megan believes this pattern might help them learn more about the mutants and eventually eradicate them. A search of the city yields no results. No other creatures are found, nor are there any breaches in the wall. No one can explain how the female managed to enter the city or why she did so. The only explanation that comes to Jason's mind is that the Abbeys may have accomplices among the population. Jason turns to Rebecca for help. She designed the city and may know the way the Abbey got inside. Upon learning that a new Abbey has appeared in the lab, Theo requests access to the research. Carrie agrees, but she warns the doctor that not all group members will like this. Naturally, Carrie is referring to Megan. The scientist makes every effort to appear satisfied with the doctor's presence, but she disobeys all of Yedlin's orders and conducts experiments that could harm the mutant. The Abbeys have quickly learned the lesson with fire. After making torches, they surround the cornfield and set it ablaze. The creature in the lab at that moment feels everything that is happening to its pack. Several years before the current events, unaware that a human invasion is imminent, the Abbey tribe enjoys a peaceful life deep in the forest. But suddenly a helicopter appears over the mutants' camp, and most of the tribe is wiped out. Only a few survive, with no other choice but to seek revenge. In the city, a siren blares, and panic begins. At the same time, the Abbey set another field on fire, knowing that by doing this, they are depriving humans of any chance of survival. Adam is the first to notice the mutants approaching. He raises the alarm and orders the squad to move to a safe place, but it's already too late. The first creatures infiltrate the camp, and one of them attacks Teresa. Megan, unaware of anything, works on reports in the lab. She is only distracted when the Abbey start banging on their cages, and the close proximity no longer feels safe. Theo learns that the food fields are burning. At that moment, Carrie arrives and asks the doctor to return to the hospital and prepare for a difficult night. Jason sends out several dozen vehicles. all civilian men or to extinguish the fields while the military protects them from Abbey attacks. Realizing how this will end, Theo orders his colleagues to prepare all available beds and be ready to receive not tens but hundreds of patients. The battlefield truly becomes a nightmare. The Abbeys are far more clever and resourceful. There's no one left to extinguish the fields. Soldiers fall before they can even reach them, suffering severe injuries from the mutants. Within an hour, the hospital turns into chaos. The screams of patients mix with the bustle of medical staff who are not prepared for such an onslaught. Theo tries to help everyone, but he cannot save them all, and many patients die in the hands of frightened interns. CJ recounts how the Abbeys attack the camp and everyone trying to extinguish the fire. But Carrie and Megan don't believe the farmer's words. They are convinced the mutants have no intelligence and thus could not have had a plan. Jason sides with the women. He is more concerned about the fate of the harvest, but CJ has no good news. All the fields have been burned, and in less than 6 weeks the city will fall to starvation. The food shortage is not the only threat. Theo informs the leader that there is a critical shortage of medicine, and soon people will begin to die from simple colds or minor cuts. Yedlin doesn't hold back in his critique, saying that Pilcher was an idiot. In creating his own world, he failed to consider the basics. Jason's thoughts are interrupted by news that around 100 Abbeys have gathered near the wall. Despite the obvious situation, the leader refuses to admit that the mutants are evolving and the advantage has long been on their side. Teresa spends several hours in intensive care, but her heart gives out, and the last thing the woman sees is her son and husband, with whom she will finally reunite. Megan performs an MRI on the Abbey, and looking at the monitor, Theo sees a surprising result. The part of the brain responsible for thinking and problem-solving is twice the size of a human's. The Abbey's roar echoes throughout the city. The monitor shows that several thousand mutants have gathered near the wall. The creatures locked in the cages respond to their kin, but the female remains remarkably calm. After a conversation with Adam, Theo examines the female Abbey's hand and discovers the pattern. He becomes furious that Megan hadn't told him about the design, but the scientist doesn't understand the significance at this moment. The doctor asks Megan not to interfere while he tries to establish contact with the Abbey. In Theo's opinion, it's the only way to find out what the mutants want and save the city. Yedlin shows the mutants several cards with pictures and tries to explain their meaning. CJ had been one of those who woke up from cryosleep every 100 years to observe changes on Earth. During one such outing, the botanist met a strange young man. He still resembled a human, but had peculiar features. The stranger rambled, ate raw fish, and suffered from unknown ailments. CJ couldn't shake the new companion. The young man demanded to be taken with him and cared for. To avoid risking the others, CJ eliminated the threat. Theo asked Megan to offer the Abbey a treat, but the mutant points towards its kin. This confirms the doctor's theory. She is not just an intelligent creature. She is a leader who cares for her pack. Adam bursts into the lab, demanding that the scientists release the female. He claims that she is the leader of the Abbeys, and her followers are gathering near the wall, ready to do anything to save their leader. A heated argument erupts among the group. Megan is convinced that Adam is overestimating the importance of the mutant, while Theo believes the leader's presence could help them negotiate with the creatures and save the city. Memories take CJ back to the day he woke up and roused the others. Pilcher, the founder of the project, was confident that mutations had ended several hundred years ago and that they were now facing only an empty, uninhabited Earth. But the scientist was wrong. The first walk in the forest reveals strange creatures vaguely resembling humans. Pilcher didn't even attempt to make contact. He also refused to return to cryosleep and slumber for several more centuries. The only thing that occurred to the professor was to declare the mutants enemies, build a city, and fence it off with a tall, electrified wall. Theo tries to communicate with the female Abbey, but Jason arrives at the lab. Like Megan and his predecessor, Pilcher, the leader of the first generation, refuses to seek a peaceful solution, convinced that the remaining humans will prevail against the thousands of creatures at the fence. The argument goes in circles, but Yedlin reminds everyone that the lives of all the city's residents are at stake. Dr. Yedlin explains to the Abbey that Jason is their leader, but the female mutant disagrees. She shows the doctor that he should be the leader of the town. This infuriates the young dictator, and he tries to stop the experiment, but Theo stands his ground. Signaling that he means no harm, Theo unlocks the cage of a male Abbey and tries to enter, but the aggressive mutant doesn't share the doctor's optimism and grabs his arm. On one hand, this frightens everyone present, but on the other, they see the female giving a signal and the monsters obey her. In Theo's opinion, everything went perfectly, but Jason thinks otherwise. Before the leader's eyes, he kills the males and plans to eliminate her as well. Theo wrestles the gun from the madman, and Carrie tries to convince him not to argue with the others. She asks her friend to leave and think things over while the doctor continues his experiments. Megan notices a crimson puddle beneath her and feels unwell. The last thing she sees is the freed female Abby behind her. At the moment when Theo was unlocking the code, the creature memorized the combination and easily repeated it. The city's residents are assured that nothing dangerous is happening and that they can continue their normal lives. But Theo returns to the lab and realizes that things are far from normal. He discovers Megan's body in the empty cage of the female Abby. At the same time, the mutant sneaks towards the exit. Jason arrives at the scene. He orders the building to be searched, unwilling to admit that he is responsible for what happened. The soldiers search every corner of the hospital, including the underground passages, but it's already pointless. The mutant is running through the forest, making her way to her kind. Suddenly, the Abby slips off a cliff, but she manages to collect herself and lands unharmed. Dr. Yedlin insists that they must warn the townspeople. If the female Abby reaches the exit, she will likely open it for thousands of her kin. But Jason stubbornly holds his ground. He plans to send unarmed townsfolk to search for the creature and fight the other Abbeys. The town's school children are locked in the school building. The other residents are also informed of the Abby's escape and are ordered to lock themselves in their homes to avoid encountering the creature. The Abby hides in the forest and notices Frank and Lucy walking by. She also sees a couple in love, but she doesn't attack the teenagers, trying to avoid detection. After this, the monster heads straight for the city and attacks one of the soldiers who participated in the hunt. The scream of the unfortunate soldier echoes throughout Wayward Pines, warning the residents of the danger. The Abbey takes the body of its victim with it. Soldiers spot the Abbey on the rooftops of houses. They open fire, but once again the monster manages to escape. The mutant continues to toy with the people, appearing in different locations. All those with any kind of weapon are called in to join the search. Xander gathers a small team, hoping to track down the Abbey. Theo and Adam also set out in search of the mutant, but all they find is the body of a soldier, which the creature dragged away. The hunters realize it was a trap. The Abbey lured them into the forest so they wouldn't interfere with her final tasks in the city. Armed citizens flood the streets, but the Abbey manages to evade them, remaining unnoticed. This leads to frightened hunters firing at each other, solving the mutant's problems for her. Finding several bodies and shooters in the street, Theo tries to de-escalate the situation. He asks a young woman to let the soldiers go so they can take their comrade to the hospital. The number of red dots on the monitor rapidly increases, indicating the number of Abbeys near the wall. Jason shows Carrie the bunker designed especially for them. He confesses to her that this shelter would allow them not only to survive, but also to enter cryosleep for as long as needed to eventually restore Earth. However, Carrie is forced to admit to her boyfriend that after the Abbey's attack, she cannot have children, and there's no point in wasting a capsule on her. Rebecca encounters the Abbey in the middle of the city, but before the monster can attack, Xander injures the mutant, protecting his fiancée and their future child. Breathing a sigh of relief, the couple hurries to the wall to find weak spots and fix them. Xander remembers the pit, and the group theorizes that it might be a tunnel leading into the city. The wounded female Abby flees into the forest and finds an entrance to such a tunnel. She prepares to leave the city, but Adam appears behind her, intent on killing the mutant. The female Abby straightens up, and fear flashes in her eyes. Seeing this, the hunter lets her go to her kind. Adam also enters the tunnel, determined to end this once and for all. Jason's squad finds a pipe from which the wild cries of the mutants can be heard. The leader orders the passage to be blown up, hoping this will stop the wild mutants. Adam manages to escape from the other side of the tunnel, but there, he is met by a crowd of wild, hungry Abbeys. However, the female with the pattern on her hand does not allow them to harm the man who saved her life and helped her escape. Hassler walks past unharmed. Despite the return of the leader, the crowd of Abbeys does not leave the area around the fence. The Abbey leader reaches the camp and is taken in by caring elders, remembering all those who became victims of humanity. Observing the Abbeys, Carrie sees that the escaped female is getting worse, and her kin gather around to say their goodbyes. But Jason is not moved by this news. He sees no tragedy in the death of an ordinary mutant. Realizing that all the city's problems are caused by the dictator's stubbornness, Theo decides to address the issue and turns to Xander for help, but the men don't have time to discuss things. CJ invites the doctor to an important meeting with Jason. The leader offers two options: surrender and accept their end, or go back into cryosleep. The female Abby's condition worsens, but her kin don't abandon her. They treat her wound and do everything they can to keep their leader alive. Jason addresses the townspeople, tells them about the Abbey invasion, and gives instructions for the evacuation. This causes unrest, but CJ steps in to calm everyone down, assuring them that the process is completely safe. After giving several lectures, CJ heads to the control center to check the equipment, but the plan is under threat. The program encounters a loading error. CJ informs Jason of the issue, insisting that the capsules need to be recharged. But there is hardly any time left, and the leader will have to choose who gets to leave the danger zone first. To make the right decision, Jason asks Dr. Yedlin to check all the citizens' profiles and assess their health on a 5-point scale. Theo dislikes this idea and suggests using a lottery to choose the lucky ones, but Jason insists that only those valuable for reproduction should remain in the end. Yedlin decides to use Carrie. He tells her that Jason has decided to leave her to be torn apart by the Abbeys because of her inability to have children. The doctor convinces her of his truth and suggests she eliminate the traitor. Many years ago, while planning the construction of a new world, David Pilcher adopted a child to make him the heir to everything. But before signing the papers, the professor meets the boy's mother, Carrie. She was the one who gave her son to the professor, who later named him Jason. While flipping through his fiancée's personal file, Jason finds a secret folder where he discovers that his fiancée is actually his biological mother. At that very moment, Carrie enters the room. The calm conversation escalates into a scuffle and a fight. Finally, a gunshot is heard in the room. Jason recalls the first time he saw Carrie, how she was introduced to the new world, and how he promised she would always be safe. But now the once-in-love young people are on the floor, in pools of crimson. As Jason fades, Carrie takes his hand to stay by his side. The female Abby regains consciousness and signals to her kin, gathering them around her. Jason is brought to the hospital, and Theo prepares him for surgery. Meanwhile, in the forest, the Abbeys are preparing for a final assault on the city. The residents are being prepared for evacuation into cryocapsules, but most townspeople linger around the hospital, waiting for news about their leader. After several hours of surgery, Theo announces Jason's death to everyone. The doctor assures the people that the plan remains unchanged. They will all be saved soon. CJ hands Dr. Yedlin the list Jason had made. He suggests following the old plan to avoid panic and save precious time. Registration for the capsules begins, and the first to enter are women and children. Those not on the first list are asked to wait at home for their turn, but many suspect they will never be called. Even among the children, there are excess. One of these extras is Frank, who had once openly told Theo that he didn't want to have children. Xander also doesn't receive an invitation. He realizes this is Yedlin's personal revenge for taking his wife. The closer the Abbeys get to the fence, the more aggressive they become. Their movements are watched by the female leader, standing above the rest. Watching the screen, Theo realizes that the fence is on the verge of being breached. The doctor decides to record one last message for future generations in which he urges humanity not to repeat David Pilcher's experiments. Such endeavors only lead to dire consequences. To somehow fix the situation, Dr. Yedlin plans to inject himself with 3 strains of dangerous viruses involuntarily surrendered to the Abbeys. This is how he intends to wipe out the terrible mutant species. Those who didn't get a place in the capsules begin to panic and search for alternative ways out. Riots break out in the city. Only Xander and Frank calmly accept their fate, sitting in a small street bar. Theo arrives to pick up the boys and take them to the departure point, but the road is blocked by 2 young men with a burning bottle and a firm decision to steal the car. Xander manages to calm the boys down, and the group leaves. On the way, Theo picks up another passenger, his intern Arlene. Yedlin returns to the lab to inject himself with the virus strains and head for the wall. But there he is met by Carrie, who asks to take on this mission herself. After Jason's death and the news that he was her son, she no longer wants to run from her fate. Learning that she has already injected herself with the viruses, Theo agrees to leave with the others. As a parting gesture, he gives her one more vial, which will numb her pain during the encounter with the Abbeys. Before the capsules are launched, Theo wishes the travelers a safe journey. He admits that he doesn't know what awaits them in the future, but hopes it will be better than the present. People take their places as the city slowly comes to a standstill in the face of danger. CJ is supposed to be the last to take his place, but his capsule malfunctions and the man sees his wife, who has been dead for several hundred years. Nevertheless, CJ decides to stay behind, hoping that one day he can change the world. Carrie opens the wall and steps outside the city, into the land where the Abbeys will live for many centuries. And so the series ends. The next day, Faraday records a message to his wife. He explains that on Earth they would be called a family, and their children would be real children and not dolls. It seems as though he's beginning to understand what emotions are. Drones on Antea have no right to choose, but on Earth the range of choices is astounding. There can be dozens of varieties of just coffee. Even children can choose. Humans create rituals out of simple actions. For example, the ritual of family dining or talking to God. And during meals, people share their day's events. They also experience a sense of joy which Faraday wishes to experience with his wife. Each generation here produces a handful of great minds. Justin is one of them. The number of emotions experienced by people in a day is absurd. And everyone around Faraday lives in fear of some kind. The fear of failure leads Clay to meet with Finch. After a tough conversation, he still pleads for another week, as Faraday was almost done building the device. Faraday then continues to explain that on Earth, everyone has their own self, but on Antea, they are born either as knowers or drones, but here everyone creates themselves. And people also believe in something higher, that is, in God. One day, Josiah suddenly cuts off a conversation about synthesis and leaves the table, and this marks the beginning of his changes. Then a man plays a jazz record explaining what it is and how it originated. While improvisation was inexplicable, Faraday tries to explain it to his wife. Meanwhile, Elizabeth tells Clay that the signal in the tornado came from somewhere in Southeast Asia. Also, the stewardess on the plane, Faraday, was posted about it afterwards. After seeing Clay off, Elizabeth calls someone on the phone and asks for a meeting. At this time, Eddie informs his brother about the desire of oil magnate Thorne to buy half of the Origin Corporation. In London, Josiah notices a music store. He then picks up a guitar and starts playing, astonishing the salesman, but suddenly the man faints. Justin finds him in the hospital, and although doctors were sure everything was fine, Faraday tells how Josiah was born in the Bahamas and turned his genius to music in his youth. But his wife left him after their daughter was born, and the alien confesses that she shared his DNA with the old man, which is now rewriting Josiah's human genome, and what he will turn into is unknown. Josiah then leaves the house and goes to a bridge. There he finds a wasp nest and stares at it for a long time, and upon returning home, starts writing an endless equation. The doctor arrives and announces that his blood oxygen level is elevated. Justin blames everything on Faraday, but suddenly, Faraday realizes that Josiah translated his daughter's equation into sound frequencies and wrote a song, the key to the synthesis process. He sets up a keyboard instrument in front of the device and asks Josiah to play its melody. Well, the man begins to play, and gradually, by changing frequencies and tempo, he manages to activate the device. Faraday joins him, and everything works out. That night, Elizabeth takes Josiah's medical chart from the doctor and reports of Clay about Faraday's successful experiment. Looking at the test results, she figures out that Newton is in Cambodia, where a cement bunker can be seen in the middle of the jungle. Clay informs Finch about this, and she forbids him to go there. But the agent sends a special force team to Cambodia. The soldiers enter the building, which turns out to be empty. But inside they find unknown plants whose dust kills them. Clay watches this in horror through a mirror screen. Meanwhile, Molly asks her family to help her with an assignment and create a family tree. But they have no photos, so Faraday draws a very similar family portrait to which Molly asks to add him. At this time, Hutch and Eddie attend the presentation of the new oncology center of the Magni, born because Eddie is obsessed with the idea of using it to protect against the CIA. Clay's people try to understand what happened in the bunker of Cambodia, and Elizabeth finds power lines laid out of the bunker, but can't yet track exactly where. Josiah notices that the fingerprints are disappearing from his fingers, and he hears synapses forming in his brain, and realizes that he's becoming an Anthean. At Eddie's estates, a meeting begins attended by Clay. Justin realizes that he is not a scientist at all and starts suspecting that something is not right. She doesn't want Faraday to fall into the hands of those who tore Newton apart. And later, Finch reprimands Clay for the soldiers' deaths and orders him to fly to Washington. Realizing that their work could be blocked by the CIA, Justin leaves, and Faraday activates the system, calling Newton to start asking questions. He doesn't understand why the launch was delayed, as it's fatal for Antea. Newton, impressed with his rebirth, advises learning to lie. To outsmart the CIA, he must make himself a legend, as Fame could not be killed. Newton disconnects, and Elizabeth, rushing into the laboratory, fails to see anything. Thinking it over, Faraday suggests making their work public, as the CIA loves silence. Hutch arranges a meeting with a journalist friend, and Faraday talks about a new energy source and the CIA's threat to freeze the project. Eddie learns that a man named Clay emerged from a witness protection program. Clay at the moment tries to explain himself to a committee and shows an order signed by Finch and talks about the tape of Newton's interrogation. The woman is shocked, as she did not expect much treachery from her protege. Clay gets a permission to continue the case. Elizabeth shows Justin camera footage from Cambodia, but Newton was not there, even though the bunker was sending a signal into space. Apparently, the alien was talking to his people and warns that Clay will never allow the machine to be taken unless they catch Newton. Justin tells Faraday about the soldiers' deaths, but he doesn't believe that Newton could have killed people. That night, Clay comes to Eddie and tells her that he and his mother came to America from Russia, but the woman turned out to be a terrorist. She blew up the building where she worked, abandoning her son to fate. That's when Finch found and adopted him. And he doesn't know where his real mom is now. And he destroyed his foster mother today, and meanwhile, Faraday also finds the Cambodian recordings and hears Newton's signal to Antea. He admits to Justin that Newton deceived everyone, and he never intended to return home because he wanted to bring the Antheans here. But he, Faraday, promises to do everything to save Earth. Newton transmits the signals intercepted by the CIA, but they cannot decrypt them. Justin is sure that the machine will still be taken, so she asks her friend to take Molly away. They then rush to the laboratory, and Elizabeth immediately reports this to Clay. Faraday dismantles the machine, gives the core to Justin, orders her and Josiah to leave, and stays in the laboratory. The pair barely manage to avoid Clay and his henchmen, and agents burst into the laboratory where they are met by Faraday. But after driving away, Justin decides to return for the alien, and in the laboratory, Faraday, seeing the agents, detonates a gas cylinder. Later, a stunned Clay sees Josiah carrying Faraday away, but is unable to stop it. Faraday regains consciousness and names Mary's phone number. Justin calls her and drives to the monastery. The sister immediately orders the preparation of the operating room and instructs to hide the device. It turns out that Faraday lost a lot of blood, but first the bullet must be removed. When Mary cuts the skin, strange tentacles jump out of the alien's body, frightening the sisters. But Mary assures them that he is an angel. Hutch receives an offer to sell his part of Origin for a large sum. Although he doesn't understand why Magnate Thorne would want a blown-up laboratory, he agrees. In the monastery, Mary sets up women on lookout posts, and Josiah announces that he's ready to give his blood to Faraday, convincing the sisters that he's a Nephilim, half angel, half human. Clay's people search Justin's house, and Elizabeth finds a clue but reports it to her mysterious contacts. At the time in the monastery, Mary confesses to Justin that she got Newton addicted to alcohol, thus ruining his life. Therefore, she asks Justin to do everything to save Faraday as she loves him, although she doesn't yet realize it. In the meantime, Clay's assistant traces a call from Justin and the agents and learns their location. Mary begins a blood transfusion operation from Josiah to Faraday. Clay's agents rush to the monastery, while Elizabeth warns someone that the alien has been found. Meanwhile, to buy time to complete the operation, the sisters and Mary arm themselves and fend off against the agents. A shootout begins, and Clay demands the surrender of the alien, but the sisters stand their ground. However, they run out of bullets and Mary orders everyone to run while she kneels at the altar. There, Clay finds her and the woman asks him to say his real name, and he admits that he is Ivan. But the nun corrects him, as his real name is Judas, and the agent shoots her. Hearing the shot, Justin goes into the room and encounters Clay. He orders Faraday, Justin, and the device to be taken, leaving the old man behind. Mary regains consciousness and crawls to the operating room with her last strength. She reaches Josiah's hand and dies happily. Justin's friend and Molly fall into the hands of unknown people. At the same time, Elizabeth warns Clay that they don't have the algorithm to activate the core, and he reports that he has interrogation experience. The alien and Justin are brought to a demolished laboratory and tied to chairs. Seeing Justin being beaten, Faraday confesses that the recorded signal from the tornado is an order for the remaining Antaeans to prepare for flight to Earth. Clay takes Justin to another room and orders Elizabeth to guard while he deals with Faraday. The agents start torturing and demanding to confess when and how the aliens will arrive. Elizabeth asks Justin for the algorithm, but Justin remembers how the girl betrayed her family. She allowed Clay to kill in the monastery, so how is she any better than him? Clay continues the torture, but it had no effect on the alien. And instead, Faraday manages to enrage Clay, claiming that it was Finch who used him and not the other way around. The agent orders water torture, but it turns out to be a gift for Faraday as he loves the water. Then Elizabeth remembers about the X-ray, and it truly causes Faraday pain, and he starts screaming, which Justin hears. Suddenly, Watt appears before Faraday and advises him to make something up for Clay. Elizabeth notices this and realizes that the alien is losing his mind. Watt, meanwhile, suggests to Faraday that Clay had two families. The alien starts seeing that one family abandoned the boy and the other he betrayed himself. This turns out to be the boy's eternal pain, and Clay gets angry and shoots Faraday in the leg. Visions of Antea, his family, and the flight flash before the alien, and he gives Clay a vision about the imminent arrival of a ship prepared by Newton. The synthesis machine is the ship's engine, but without Faraday it won't work, and the alien offers Clay to play Russian roulette. And this is because he can entrust synthesis only to someone who won't hesitate to sacrifice themselves for progress. Faraday tells Clay about his biological mother's dossier, which he found on the internet. He'll say where she is if Clay loads a bullet, spins the chamber, and pulls the trigger. The agent will have a chance to ask 5 questions, and if he survives, Faraday will give him the synthesis. The agent agrees to the terms, and they start the game of Russian roulette. Clay asks about the world of Antea. Faraday tells, and the agent pulls the trigger, and he survives. Finally, they get to the main question for Clay about his mother, and the alien confesses that everything with his biological mother was planned and executed by Finch. She was part of a team working on Newton, and she deliberately deprived the boy of his family and took away his name. Clay, driven mad, points the gun at Faraday, but Elizabeth, who enters, shoots first, killing the agent, and she contacts someone and reports that she has Faraday and Justin, and soon people from oil magnate Thorne arrive at the bunker. Molly has been with them for a long time and is safe, and Josiah is also alive, but his illness has returned. All of them are now under Thorne's protection as he sees the future in synthesis. The people are taken to meet the magnate, and in a vine-covered cave where Buddhist monks sit on the floor, they meet Newton. Faraday recalls how on Antea the Norse took seeds from him that was supposed to sprout on Earth. In the present, Faraday expresses outrage over his dissection, but Newton draws attention to the surrounding vegetation. He had given the monks Antea seeds in exchange for shelter and permission to observe their prayers. This area is a complete magnetic anomaly, which is why satellites see nothing and the CIA cannot find him. Therefore, no one could spot the huge spaceship that Newton built. He shows the ship to Faraday, who realizes that only the knowers should come to Earth. Faraday is shocked because it was the knowers who made all the decisions that led to Antaea's demise. And the drones just followed their orders. But now it's the knowers who must perish. Justin also realizes that after the arrival of the knowers, humans will become drones, and after all, the reborn Josiah stopped experiencing emotions and began to prioritize efficiency over love. Newman insists that only the merging of races will give Earth a chance to survive, but Justin is adamantly against it. She refuses to unlock the device algorithm, which she altered before fleeing the laboratory. She leaves and Newton forces his student to learn the algorithm, as he's destined to be the one who will greet the aliens on Earth and prevent their killing. This is because he will become a legend after becoming the head of the Origin Corporation. Faraday demands to take his family on the ship, but Newton advises forgetting about them and staying Justin. He doesn't want to see drones on Earth. Faraday was wrongly classified as a servant because he always asks questions. Faraday finds Justin, who's disappointed in him, and demands to be taken home, but he couldn't do that until he learns the algorithm. He confesses that it was she and her family who taught him to love. Justin gives in and goes home, and they again live in their old house. Josiah's illness has returned, and the woman is disappointed, but her father reminds her of faith, which will help them endure everything. 3 months later, Elizabeth visits Justin, and the woman confesses that she betrayed them for money. But now the CIA will take revenge on her and sooner or later kill her. But before that, they will take Faraday, and Elizabeth gives her cross to Justin and asks her for forgiveness, and Justin reveals to her Thorne's identity. Later, she accidentally finds Faraday's device, which alerts her to an approaching tornado. Justin follows its directions and enters the hurricane's eye. Meanwhile, news reports broadcast a man ready to share a new type of energy with the world. In the evening, in a huge theater, Faraday appears on stage and he begins to talk about everything that happened. Simultaneously, agents head to Justin and Hutch's home. At the theater, a sniper targets Faraday, but he pulls out the synthesis box, forcing the sniper to stop. Faraday is brought to Finch, and he refuses to answer until he sees Justin and Hutch. Although Finch is sure that she is one, the couple is brought in. Then Faraday reminds them that the controlling stake in the new enterprise now belongs to Justin and Hutch, and without their consent, no one can do anything with the device. Faraday will fly to Antaea and bring back the remaining people of his planet to Earth. Finch threatens all three with imprisonment, and in response, Faraday announces that in 12 hours, the blueprints for quantum synthesis will appear on the internet, and people will get it for free, and the USA will no longer be the world's owner. Finch threatens Justin's family, but Justin reminds her that against the system is the entire population of Earth, and now the CIA will have to worry about their safety. Later, Faraday comes to Newton, who admits that he's proud of him. Later, Faraday visits Josiah to return his hat and thank him for showing him his paternal love. He says goodbye to Molly, teaching her Antaean gestures, and she gives him a logo figurine. The hardest moment for him arrives saying goodbye to Justin, and he will bring his family there, although they might not recognize him now. But the woman is sure that everything will be as it should be. Faraday prepares for departure, while Molly and Justin planned Antaea's siege near their house. And at night, they watch the launch from a distant star. At times very naive, at times deep and subtle, with philosophy, with reflections on family values, but overall, lovers of science fiction should really enjoy it. In the remote forests of Washington state, a young man tracks and kills a deer. Children of various ages, smeared with black soot, emerge from the forest accompanied by their father, Ben Cash, who announces,
"Today the boy is dead, and in his place is a man."
He then feeds the hunter the liver of the freshly killed animal. The children look proudly at their brother and then joyfully splash in the clear waters of a forest stream, washing off their camouflage. Later, they carry the animal's carcass to their home, nestled deep in the forest. Nearby, there's a greenhouse and outbuildings for storage, with a garden surrounding them. Inside, everything is tidy and organized, with each forest home resident diligently performing their tasks. Later, they gather in a clearing where, after meditation, the father teaches the children self-defense techniques.
You kill her.
Yeah, thank you. Let's try that.
In the evening, the family gathers around a campfire where the children read world classics and scientific literature. The father questions each child about the material, helping them understand everything from advanced mathematics to literary styles, and gives them assignments for the next day. Then he takes out a guitar. Everyone brings their instrument, and soon an improvised melody plays by the campfire, under which the children dance. In the morning, the family goes for their mandatory run along forest trails. Everything seems to follow a well-established routine. Later, the father and his eldest son, Bo, return from a trip to the nearest town for supplies. Unexpectedly, the younger children ask,
"Why does Mommy have to be gone so long?"
She hasn't been gone very long.
It turns out their mother is in a hospital, and the father is going to find out when she can return home. In town, while Ben shops, local girls flirt with Bo. However, he doesn't know what to talk about with them, as his knowledge of political structures doesn't interest them much. So Bo goes to get the mail and finds several letters addressed to him, inviting him to the country's best universities. Meanwhile, Ben reaches his sister, who informs him that his wife Leslie has taken her own life. Returning home, he sits under a forest waterfall for a long time before coming out to the children to announce the tragic news.
Last night, Mommy killed herself.
While everyone weeps, Ben's middle son, Relian, grabs a knife and tries to attack his father, but then directs his blows at a tree, venting his anger. Later, Ben reads his wife's found will, amazed by it. But morning comes, and the family again runs along the forest trail and exercises in the clearing. Suddenly, Relian asks,
"Dad, when's Mom's funeral?"
Ben returns to town and contacts his wife's parents, who blame everything on their former son-in-law, even though they chose this life together. When Leslie got sick, her parents found and paid for the clinic, but nothing helped.
I found her will.
You are not welcome here. I will have you arrested.
However, Leslie's mother informs him that the burial will take place in 5 days. Later, the family discusses what happened. The children understand their grandparents' anger, but cannot allow their mother's will to be disregarded. However, the threat of their father being arrested and them being sent to an orphanage scares them. At night, Ben hears his wife's voice.
What we're doing out here is so incredible. I love you so much.
In the morning, Ben finds all 6 children ready in the yard, wanting to see their mother one last time. He strongly opposes the trip, but the children insist.
Dad, give us the mission.
Mission, rescue Mom!
But Ben reminds them of the upcoming training. Struggling, Relian falls off the cliff and injures his arm, but the father reminds him,
"No one will magically appear and save you in the end."
The children persistently conquer the difficult peak as it starts to rain. Later, they rest at the base of the cliff. On the way home, the father suddenly stops the bus and admits that they cannot go to their mother's funeral because they cannot argue with her relatives. But suddenly, Ben stops his speech and turns on the music.
They set off
into the big world in their converted bus. Along the way, Ben gives the children a unique tour, showing them America's sights.
Attention all campers. This is your captain speaking.
Later, Ben orders them to search for any game for dinner.
Everyone keep their eyes peeled for deer.
Finding nothing suitable, the family stops for the night. In the morning, they arrive at a bank, and while Ben withdraws money, the children look around in surprise.
What's wrong with everyone?
Are they sick?
Convincing the children that laughing at people is wrong, Ben tells them to return to the bus. Soon, a police officer stops them and asks for documents. Checking the license, he inquires,
No school today.
and goes to inspect the bus. The situation is saved by Bo, who starts reading religious texts and says they are homeschooled. The children sing hymns and the officer hurries away. The bus continues on, but soon they stop to hunt for food. However, the children cannot shoot at domestic animals. The bus drives on. Suddenly, the children start crying, remembering their mother. The girls speak to each other in Esperanto, which angers their father.
No Esperanto. I'm not joking.
The children start communicating in world languages. Soon, Ben has to stop at a cafe, but the menu confuses her.
Cola.
Poison water.
Realizing there is no proper food here, Ben orders the children to leave. He goes to a supermarket and fills the cart with groceries. Suddenly, he grabs his chest and falls to the floor. While concerned shoppers try to help him, the children steal the groceries. Ben regains consciousness and leaves the store. Driving a bit further, the father reviews their actions, and the children analyze the mistakes made during the theft in detail. Finally, Ben presents a stolen cake, as today is the birthday of scientist Chomsky.
Uncle, now it's the day of your birthday.
After the treat, the father gives all the children useful gifts: a bow, knives, a book on sex education, and arrows. But this angers Relian.
Why can't we celebrate Christmas like the rest of the entire world?
The father doesn't understand why a mythical elf is more useful than a thinker and humanist. He offers his son to share his thoughts and convince him of the correctness of his reasoning. But the boy leaves. The family moves on. Soon they reach Ben's sister Harper's house. The woman is happy to see all her nephews, but their questions surprise her.
How did you kill those chickens? With an axe or a knife?
She tries to find answers and is again astonished that Ben honestly and thoroughly explains even very delicate matters to the children. Harper's husband tries to offer condolences, but Ben calmly reminds him that he couldn't stand his wife. Then he straightforwardly explains the cause of his wife's death. His sister and her husband try to end the conversation. Children shouldn't know the details, but Ben tells the children the real cause of their mother's death.
Probably a form of postpartum psychosis.
Ignoring his sister, who left the table, he pours wine for the children. Later, the children watch with curiosity as their cousins play video games. Ben argues with his sister, who cannot accept such democracy in parenting.
I tell the truth to my kids. I don't lie to my kids.
Protecting children.
Harper believes that not sharing what children cannot understand isn't a lie. Her husband suggests postponing the conversation until morning, and Ben apologizes. Meanwhile, the children take their sleeping bags and set up for the night in the yard, despite having rooms prepared for them. In the morning, everyone gathers at the table, and Ben allows the children to play video games with their cousins. When the children leave, his sister and her husband try to reason with
Kids
Ben.
need structure. They need to go to a real school.
Then Ben calls his nephews and asks them questions about political science and history. The boys can't answer a single question. However, Ben's youngest daughter freely discusses these topics. Relatives are impressed by such knowledge and no longer object to Ben's way of educating his children. The family moves on. They soon stop to rest at a campground where Bo meets a girl. She is surprised by his unusual name, and he explains that his parents made it up.
I'm Claire.
Bodevan. Our names are unique. There's only one of us in the whole world.
In the evening, they continue their acquaintance. The girl is surprised that Bo doesn't know modern pop music but loves Bach and cello suites. He lies that they recently lived in Paris and is amazed at her ignorance. He avoids questions about his mother and, after kissing the girl for the first time, declares his intention to marry her to her mother.
I am ready for you, if you will have me. Will you be my wife?
The mother leads the girl back to the trailer. In the morning, the bus pulls out of the parking lot and Bo waves to the girl and her mother. That day, they reach the church where Leslie's farewell ceremony is held. Relatives and friends mourn the woman when a group in bright clothes enters the church, stunning everyone. The preacher tells about Leslie, and when he mentions her husband, Ben takes the floor and reads his wife's will.
First of all, Leslie practiced Buddhism.
If nothing else, she had a sense of humor.
Leslie's last will and testament.
Finally, she asks to have her ashes flushed down the nearest toilet. Enraged, Leslie's father Jack orders Ben to be thrown out of the church. The children run after him while the preacher continues his sermon. Soon, Leslie's coffin is carried outside. Grandma and Grandpa hug the grandchildren, some of whom they see for the first time. Nevertheless, Jack forbids Ben to go to the cemetery, threatening arrest. Ben orders the children to get in the bus and follows the procession, though the children beg him to stop.
No, I don't want to lose you!
Hearing the last argument, Ben stops the bus. They drive to the suburbs and stop for the night. The man opens a bottle of wine and drinks it, sitting by the bus while his sons go to a sports field and remember their mother. Unexpectedly, Relian declares,
Mom had psychotic episodes. Dad made her crazy. Dad's dangerous.
Upset, Bo returns to Ben and shows him letters from all the universities in America, offering to accept him for study. Suddenly, the father accuses him of lying and secrecy, and Bo confesses, "It was Mom. I just want to go to college." Ben is stunned, knowing his son speaks 6 languages, advanced mathematics, and physics. What else can he be taught? But the son becomes furious.
I don't know anything about anything!
Later, he receives a note from his youngest son, who ran away to live with his grandparents. Seeing his father come for him, Relian accuses him of killing his mother.
You killed Mom! I heard you fighting about where we live. Mom wanted to leave.
Ben tries to prove to his son that they made the decision together with Leslie, but the boy is determined to stay with his grandparents. Ben orders him to pack, but the boy shouts insults and runs away. Ben follows, but an arrow lands right next to him. This is Jack stopping his son-in-law.
They're going to be totally unprepared for the real world.
Jack intends to file for custody of the children. Ben refuses to leave without his son, and then Jack calls the police. Ben has to leave. Later, he and the children hide in the dark, watching the grandfather's house. Then they send Vesper to rescue the captive. Unexpectedly, the daughter falls from the roof and crashes. A shocked Ben can't believe it happened. The girl is taken to the hospital. A vertebra is fractured. The doctor is very impressed by her physical condition, but the girl was very lucky. In the morning, Ben brings the children to Leslie's parents' house. He watches them interact with their grandfather. Her mother shows the last letters from her daughter.
We created a paradise out of Plato's Republic. I'm going to get better out here. I know I will.
Later, Ben tells the children they will stay here, but this causes outrage because this house is the opposite of everything he taught them. However, the father, frightened by Vesper's injury, realizes that his entire life was a beautiful mistake.
It was too much, and I knew it. I'll ruin your lives.
Ben unloads the children's belongings from the bus and says goodbye to Jack. He promises to arrange the children's lives in the best way. The man drives away. Sitting behind the wheel, he cries, looking at the empty cabin. Reaching a gas station restroom, he shaves off his long-standing beard. At night, he stops by the roadside, lights a campfire, and suddenly hears a voice.
Shaved your face.
And his children emerge from the bus, having hidden in the luggage compartment. The children want to save their mother and complete the mission, and the father gives in. The family goes to the cemetery and digs up Leslie's coffin, restoring the grave so no one notices the theft. Later, Bo shaves his hair and beard, earning his father's approving smile. Soon the family takes Leslie's coffin to the seaside, where the children build a funeral pyre for her, and after saying their goodbyes, light it under their mother's favorite song. Everyone sings and dances, fulfilling her last wish. Sometime later, they go to the airport to see off Bo, who is flying to Namibia for volunteer work, and also flush their mother's ashes down the toilet, according to her will. The father gives his son final advice.
Always tell the truth. Always take the high road. Don't die. I won't.
Later, the family settles on a farm, raising chickens in their bus. Ben tends to the farm and the children start going to school. The film ends here.
Okay. If it were a plague, where are all the bodies?
American tourists, a young couple named Janai and Riley, arrive in Iceland to admire the magnificent nature and spend some time alone together. They check into a hotel and begin their sightseeing with a visit to a geothermal pool. Janai knows that Riley has spent all his savings on this trip and appreciates it. Though Riley doesn't think he did anything extraordinary, he just wanted to make his beloved happy. Janai notices that Riley brought his father's Rolleiflex camera and a lot of film. She is surprised that he prefers this outdated technology over a modern digital camera, but Riley explains that he dreams of capturing the imperfections of the moment rather than having a computer program automatically correct all the mistakes. He admits he's still learning, but he's striving for perfection and promises to take her portrait. One day they visit an old church, and a priest tells them its history. The man is convinced that life in pre-Christian times was simpler. It was an era of long journeys and discoveries. The couple tours the island's landmarks, goofing around and capturing everything on camera. Later, Janai tells Riley that her father is a preacher, although his church isn't as beautiful. She often visited there and, of course, believes in God. They then explore the waterfalls, and Janai is thrilled by the beauty. They are very happy and consider the trip wonderful. However, at night, Janai can't sleep. It's too bright outside. She looks out the window and sees strange flashes of light in the distance, mistaking them for an exceptionally bright aurora borealis. But exhaustion takes over, and she falls asleep. In the morning, Riley wakes Janai up at 10 a.m., not noticing the date that appeared on his digital watch, 2028. Janai, however, still lives in her own time and finds it hard to wake up. The constant daylight outside is also a challenge for her. Nevertheless, she somehow manages to get out of bed. The couple heads out for breakfast, but it turns out that no one has prepared it. In fact, there's a strange silence and emptiness all around. There's no sign of the staff, nor of other guests. Riley suggests they go to a cafe, and the couple steps outside, but here too the emptiness reigns. There isn't a single passerby, although the traffic lights work perfectly, and the signs above the establishments and shops are brightly lit. They are puzzled. Maybe there's an event in the city today, or a holiday? Riley remembers the solstice, an ancient celebration, and wonders if all the townspeople, young and old, have gone to it. The couple walks down an utterly deserted street, occasionally shouting, but there's no one around, no staff in the shops, and no one responds to their calls. Their personal phone calls also go unanswered. Soon, Riley and Janai enter an empty cafe where Riley notices several working televisions, but every channel shows everything except the news. Janai starts to panic. Riley is equally baffled. If there was a plague, where are the bodies? If aliens are to blame, where is their ship? There are no new emails or posts on the internet, no activity at all. They return to their room, where Janai continues to call her relatives and friends, but all remain silent. The internet works, but there are no updates. Riley launches a world map view, but the same picture is everywhere. Empty cities. He takes Janai outside again. Soon they notice a working car, and without being able to find the owner, they simply take it. The couple drives around the city and eventually reaches the church, but everywhere there's the same silence and emptiness. Then they drive out of the city, but it's the same there. Their parents do not answer the calls. Only answering machines are working everywhere. They continue to speculate about the causes of what happened. Riley suggests various theories, even the possibility of the second coming, but Janai is tired and wants to sleep, so they return to their room. In the morning, Riley suggests making breakfast, but Janai is completely drained and doesn't want to move. She dreams of leaving the island, but how can they do that? And she is also tormented by thoughts of being chosen. Maybe they were needed for something by God. After all, it's impossible to explain what happened otherwise. Riley, on the other hand, believes it's all about a virus, and it's quite possible that the entire population of the island simply fled. Riley tries to remain optimistic. He makes coffee for Janai and then takes her to the store. Filling the trunks of 2 SUVs with groceries, he drives Janai to a house they have chosen. Later, they go to a store and pick out new clothes for themselves. Riley explains that the electricity on the island is powered by geothermal energy, so most likely it will continue to function for a long time until the equipment breaks down. Riley does his best to distract Janai from sad thoughts. They drink at a bar and then play strip games, but in the morning they suffer from hangovers. Janai again talks about being tested, but faith and religion are not the same. And who knows what God has planned. However, for now, this world belongs only to them. They continue to tour the island, and Riley takes pictures of Janai in all the scenic spots. One day they find a geothermal pool and enjoy a bath there. Then they make love and sleep right on the grass. When she wakes up, Janai admires the beauty of the island's nature, while Riley tirelessly photographs her. One day they go to get groceries, and while Janai punches cereal boxes, Riley, riding a shopping cart, falls and injures his arm. In the evening, he invites Janai to a romantic dinner. The couple dresses up and Janai applies makeup, but once they sit at the table, she immediately starts an unpleasant conversation because she can't stop thinking about what happened during the day and pressures Riley to promise not to put himself at risk again. After all, what would happen to her if something happened to him? They are completely alone here, and no one can help them. Janai sinks deeper into depression despite Riley's promise to take care of himself. She remembers her home and a book that is very dear to her. Her father once gave it to her, and she turned it into a kind of diary, writing down the events of her life on its blank pages. She even confessed her love for the first time there, and now she dreams of just holding it in her hands. Riley reminds her that they have each other, and they will be able to survive. After all of humanity's achievements are at their disposal. However, time passes and the food in the stores starts to expire. Janai is very annoyed by Riley's habit of eating perishable foods out of order, as he doesn't think about tomorrow at all. Soon the electricity will run out, which means there will be no more meat. To this, Riley suggests they take up farming and hunting, which only makes Janai laugh. Well, he might shoot a cow, but what will he do with it then? Janai increasingly wanders around the area alone, and one day coming to the church, she asks the figures around it questions. Maybe it's only they who have been thrown out of life, while everyone else is now at home? Why did this happen to her? Seeing Janai's bad mood, Riley tries to cheer her up. They continue to explore the island, as he knows its history quite well and believes that the heart of the earth beats here. But unlike Riley, Janai doesn't feel the specialness of this place. One day he shows her the old remains of a plane he found while exploring the area. Riley calls it beautiful, but Janai sees it only as a reminder of the dead world they now inhabit. It's trash, just like them, and no one will come for them. An angry Janai drives away, but later returns for Riley, who is calmly sleeping in the wreckage of the plane. Now Riley spends more and more time on the empty city streets, photographing everything that seems interesting to him. Then he throws away the film because there's nowhere to develop it. He roams the shops and one day remembers that if the electricity runs out, there will be no water in the house. He collects all the necessary items in a hardware store and takes them home. One day, absent-mindedly entering an elevator, he panics when the doors close. After all, no one will be able to find him if the electricity goes out. Meanwhile, Janai goes to the cinema and cries as memories flood over her. In the meantime, Riley sets up a water collection system with a wind-powered motor in the yard, and Janai finds an abandoned farm and rides a horse. Later, she listens to the voicemails from friends and relatives saved on her phone. Then she takes Riley to a place in the countryside she likes. She is surprised that Riley continues to photograph everything, but he promises that he will find a way to develop the film. Janai points out that they are sitting on a glacier, a force of nature that kills all living things. Maybe God has also run out of patience? Later they return to the city, and while Riley is busy with his tasks, Janai finds a photographer's studio. One day they enter a flower shop, and Janai is very upset to find that all the plants have long died. Realizing that Janai is depressed by the decaying city, Riley suggests they go camping. He persuades her that it's time to find a place where they can live in comfort and plenty. Soon Riley notices a house by the lake that seems suitable. The couple goes inside, and even Janai has to admit that the place is very beautiful. However, while exploring the area, they stumble upon an old man named Niels, who is very weak from lack of food. The couple gladly shares their supplies with him. Niels is shocked that there are no other survivors and believes that the end of the world has come. When it all happened, he was also in the city but returned to his home where he once left his family. Janai, who was very happy to find another survivor, is deeply upset by Niels's defeatist attitude. The old man tells her about his family life. In his youth, he would leave his family for long periods to earn money by fishing. When he returned, he found that they had changed. His son had grown up, and his wife had fallen out of love with him because he was always away. He accepts God's will because it's people who live in the world he created, not the other way round. And he advises Janai not to give up, for she is human and therefore must fight. Although if there is some divine plan, humanity has failed to fulfill it. The next morning, Riley informs Janai that Niels has died. Janai is shocked by this. Riley says he found a cemetery by the lake where he chose a spot next to Niels's family, but Janai isn't sure that these people missed the man during his life and would be glad to see him now. Riley is puzzled by Janai's thoughts, but she suggests they not bury the man at all since no one needs it. Riley tries to remind her of human customs, and Janai suddenly thinks that there might be others who need their help. After returning to the city, Janai becomes obsessed with searching for other survivors. She drives house to house, marking the empty ones with red tape. Riley suggests that she is looking for answers where there are none, and that instead they should try to make the most of their new life. But Janai isn't sure this can be called life. While Janai rushes around the city, Riley finishes building his wind turbine in the yard. Time passes. The couple continues to walk around the island, and Riley continues to photograph Janai. One day he takes her to a waterfall and says that water is always alive. It flows, freezes, melts, and flows again. Life tries. There is no yesterday or tomorrow here. There is only today. They need to try to understand this and survive. But Janai interrupts his musings with a kiss. Later they return to the house, and Janai notices that the water is running out. She washes the dishes in a basin while Riley goes to sleep. Suddenly she notices an email on the laptop. Janai opens it with trepidation and cries when she realizes it's a photo from Riley. Morning comes. Riley goes to the kitchen where a large envelope addressed to him is lying on the table. He connects his water system and opens the envelope. Inside are printed photos of Janai, but the girl herself is nowhere to be found, and this worries Riley. He rushes out to find her, visiting all the places they liked. Meanwhile, his system starts working, and water flows into the house without the need for electricity. Riley continues to drive around the island, and finally finds Janai's body floating in a geothermal pool. Realizing that she did this voluntarily, he at first also wants to end his life and jumps into the water, but soon he resurfaces and climbs out. Riley cries as he sits by her body, then lays her on the grass, not knowing what to do now. Then he simply leaves, abandoning the girl by the pool. Riley gets into the car, drives onto the road, and drives for a long time without holding the wheel. But gradually his hands lower onto the steering wheel, and he firmly grips it as if deciding to keep living. The film is called bokeh, the blurred parts of a photograph that the photographer uses to highlight other parts of the image that they consider more significant. The director similarly highlights the main contrast, the two diametrically opposed positions of the last people on Earth. The man immediately accepts the situation as it is and intends to live on, while the woman falls into depression and begins to search for the meaning of what happened. So what chance does humanity have for rebirth under such circumstances? Physics professor Jason Desson's morning begins as usual. An alarm clock rings, he checks his high school son Charlie's homework, and makes coffee for his beloved wife Daniela. The woman is in a hurry and grateful for the attention. However, she is adamantly against letting Charlie drive. Despite this, Jason trusts the boy with the car, and they nearly have an accident. The father calms his son and suggests he confess his feelings to a girl he likes. Meanwhile, Jason receives a call from his friend, Ryan, who is eager to share some good news. He has received a very prestigious scientific award and invites Jason to celebrate that evening. Later, Jason heads to the university, where he tries to explain the essence of Schrödinger's thought experiment to his students. He draws a cat locked in a box on the board. Inside the box, there's also a vial of poison, a radioactive atom, and a Geiger counter. If the atom does not decay, the cat survives. But if it does, the Geiger counter will detect radiation, the vial will break, and the cat will die. All this illustrates the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, which posits that until the box is opened, the atom is in a state of superposition, undetermined. The lecture is interrupted by a phone call, and Jason watches as the students hurriedly leave without hearing that the cat is simultaneously alive and dead. Later, Jason enters a dark room, records the day's events in his notebook, and injects himself with dark matter. The scene shifts to the family kitchen, where Jason and Daniela are preparing dinner. Charlie teases his parents for kissing too often. Then messages from Ryan, who has been waiting at the bar for a while, arrive. Daniela insists that her husband should go meet his best friend. Jason relents and heads to the bar. Ryan is delighted by his arrival and orders Daniela's favorite drink, which the bartender notes is the last bottle. Ryan introduces his colleagues to Jason and unexpectedly offers him a position in his new consciousness research lab. There's one catch: the Center for Neuropsychology will be in San Francisco, and Jason is unsure if his family will want to move from Chicago. He promises to think about it and heads home, but on a dark street he is suddenly stopped by an armed man in a mask. Jason is ready to hand over everything valuable he has, but the robber seems interested in something else. He puts Jason in the car, calling him by name, and orders him to comply. Along the way, the robber unlocks his phone, knowing the password, and asks questions about Ryan. Soon they arrive at a deserted building where the robber orders Jason to undress. He complies, but still decides to attack the assailant. However, he receives a heavy blow to the head and immediately feels an injection in his neck. The robber tells him to put on different clothes and warns that Jason is being given a new opportunity. He should remember this thought because now he will have everything he ever dreamed of, and he's doing this for both of them. When Jason asks who the robber is, he's told it's better not to know. Jason's consciousness fades. He regains consciousness in a hospital ward. He is examined and sent to a shower stall. Eventually, Jason comes to his senses in an unfamiliar bedroom. He tries to leave, but the doors are locked. Suddenly, a woman he doesn't recognize enters, behaves as if she knows him well, and introduces herself as Amanda. She informs him that his body is clean and he is no longer in quarantine. Jason doesn't understand what is happening, but no one answers his questions. The second person Jason sees is Layton, with whom he once worked a long time ago. Layton congratulates him on his triumph and calls him the chief scientific officer. Then, the blinds open and numerous colleagues applaud Jason, welcoming back the only one who returned. He has been absent for 14 months and 10 days, and they all want to hear about his journey. Confused, Jason begins to talk about the meeting at the bar and the strange robber, but his patience runs out because he doesn't know the people around him and doesn't understand what's happening here. Leighton announces that he must stay here overnight. However, Jason pushes him away and starts to run. He manages to reach the exit, where a security guard calls him by name and helps open the door. Jason flees the premises despite being pursued. He manages to catch a taxi, gives his address, and heads home. But upon entering, he finds his home changed beyond recognition. At the same time, in another reality, the new Jason returns from the bar and sees his upset wife Daniela. He embraces her, tells her about Ryan's offer, and reminds her of his long-ago choice to marry her, not a cold, sterile laboratory. The wife thaws and kisses her husband, unaware that this man is actually not her Jason. In another world, the first Jason meets Amanda in his home instead of his wife and son, who says they live there together. Jason does not believe this and begins to look for traces of his son, but Charlie's room looks completely different. Now it is Jason's own office, filled with awards for outstanding achievements and discoveries he has received over the years. He tries to call his wife Daniela, but the number is unavailable. Jason roams around the house trying to understand what is really happening. Meanwhile, Amanda makes a phone call, asking to handle the matter herself, but Jason sees a car with security arriving at the house and flees. In another reality, Daniela leads her husband into the bedroom and notices a wound on his arm. However, he assures her that she would not believe the truth and kisses her. Meanwhile, Jason 1 rushes to the bar he was at the night before, but the bartender refuses to recognize him, although the man calls him by name and reminds him of his favorite drink. Jason insists, but the bartender kicks him out, advising him to check his head. Then Jason goes to the hospital, where he undergoes a brain tomogram and is given sedatives. He constantly remembers Daniela and tries to find his wedding ring. At the same time, Jason 2 wakes up next to Daniela, kisses his wife, and surveys the kitchen, trying to find coffee. Simultaneously, the first Jason comes to and sees a doctor in front of him who tells him about the results of his tests. The fact is that an unknown psychoactive substance has been found in his blood, but according to all other indicators, he is completely healthy. At his request, they tried to find his family, but there is no one in Chicago with such names. The doctors also checked his file. The woman lists his achievements in science, which Jason himself does not remember, and she informs him that he had been missing for more than a year, and they would like to know where he was. Jason 1 himself checks his information and still finds Daniela, but under her maiden name. In this world, she continues to pursue painting, and her exhibition is supposed to open just today. At this time, Amanda, Leighton, and a security officer discuss the situation. The woman suggests calling the police. However, Leighton opposes the idea and the security officer suggests checking the hospital. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Jason steals a white coat and walks out into the hall where he sees the familiar security officer. He manages to avoid the encounter and leave the hospital. Jason 2 arrives at the university and, apologizing for his tardiness, continues the lecture. Jason 1 arrives at the exhibition hall. Hearing his name, the man is freely admitted inside, where he examines a modern installation. Later, he sees his own portrait among the displayed paintings and finds Daniela. He embraces her and tries to ask about Charlie, but the woman doesn't know who that is. Moreover, she is constantly being congratulated, and she introduces Jason as the inspiration for her success. Ryan arrives, very surprised by Jason's appearance, as there had been many varied rumors about his disappearance. The man is upset with Jason because he did a lot for him and Velocity. Hearing the company's name, from which he recently escaped, Jason begins to ask questions, but then Daniela starts a speech, which includes questions about unfulfilled dreams. Everyone was asking what he could have been and advises remembering the other doors he could have entered. At the same time, in another world, Jason 2 listens to Daniela's stories about her work plans and gives advice to his son, which surprises his wife. Simultaneously, Jason 1, Ryan, and Daniela from the New World discuss plans. Jason suddenly proposes a hypothesis about a scientist, married to the woman of his dreams, who once went to a bar where he met an old friend who had received a prestigious award. But on the way back, he was attacked, and when he woke up, everything around him had changed. A brain check revealed no abnormalities, only an unknown substance was found in his body. For a practical joke, it was too elaborate, and he had not gone mad. Jason asked to explain how he inspired Daniela's creativity, and she reminds him that once he came to her and said that theoretically people exist in millions of parallel realities, and his decision to part with her was his biggest mistake in this world. Then he talked about some secret project and warned that they would not see each other again. Then Jason starts to describe their life together with their son, causing Ryan's anger and Daniela's tears. He describes his friend's achievements in his own world, but he leaves. At the same time, Jason 2 mixes up toothbrushes, causing his wife's confusion. And Jason 1 receives permission to spend the night in Daniela's guest room, and looking around he finds an elastic band, which he wraps around his ring finger, mimicking a wedding ring. Meanwhile, Jason 2 perplexes his wife with unusual tenderness and examines the photographs on the walls of the house, after which he calls Ryan and declines his offer to work in San Francisco. At this time, Jason 1 calls Amanda and tells her that he is going to the psychiatric hospital. The woman heads there, but it turns out to be a ruse that Jason used to lure her out of the house, and now he and Daniela are inspecting his home together. The man points to a photo, but in his world they are depicted as a family in it. He talks about a son who is as talented as his mother, and Daniela admits that after he left her, she got rid of the child. Jason doesn't believe this, as everything was different, but Daniela insists that in her world, that's exactly what happened. People cannot understand why their memories differ so much, but the woman starts to believe his stories. Later, he finds records of his double from this world and realizes that he made a great discovery in quantum physics. Jason number 2 created a more voluminous version of the container where a person was put into superposition and gained the ability to move between multiple realities. It turns out that his double, Jason number 2, moved to his world and sent Jason number 1 to his dimension, to this world. So Jason is one person, living in reality until the question of marrying Daniela came up. When the first Jason chose his family, the second left Daniela. Their universes split, and the second Jason gave himself to science and invented the container. They switched worlds, but why? Later, Daniela admits that she is glad he appeared, and he explains the rubber band on his hand as a desire to preserve the marriage and return to his wife. He talks about their life there, in another reality, and admits that they were happy. Daniela kisses him, but at that moment, someone knocks at the door. They go to open it, and a security officer from the company Velocity, from which Jason had escaped, bursts into the house. He asks not to use weapons, but the woman shoots Daniela, and the last thing Jason sees is her blood-covered face. This is the first 2 episodes of a new series from Apple TV titled Dark Matter. At night, Leighton informs Amanda about what happened, and she rushes to the center where Jason has been taken. Leighton, in the meantime, apologizes to the tied-up Jason. He couldn't imagine his friend was so unstable and cannot release him yet. Jason, shocked by Daniela's murder, does not want to talk about his supposed genius invention. Jason 2 invites Daniela 1 to a cafe. She is surprised by her husband's behavior, but likes this new Jason. Moreover, they have a dinner planned for close friends the next day, something their family hasn't done in a long time. In a parallel reality, a detective visits Leighton, surprised by yet another disappearance of an employee from their lab. Before this, Blair and a couple of junior employees also vanished. Leighton pretends to know nothing. The detective goes to Amanda. Later, Amanda expresses her displeasure. She is very upset with Don's behavior, while the boss reminds her of the millions spent. If everything comes out, the project will be shut down. They don't understand what happened to Jason, who decides to play along with the colleagues and asks for help in remembering everything. Leighton takes him to a hangar where a huge metal box stands. Jason recalls trying to create a small Schrodinger's box once, but Leighton convinces him that he managed to make a huge box that can easily fit several people. Only Jason knows how it works. The man steps inside, but there are no panels or screens. Recording devices don't work either. Jason is told about the missing people and then shown footage of him emerging from the box. Jason 2 takes Charlie to a store, buys him an expensive skateboard, surprising his son with generosity, and then questions him about the family friends coming to dinner tomorrow. In a parallel reality, Amanda tells Jason 1 that she works as a psychiatrist in the lab, and they have been living together for over a year. Before he disappeared, he met with his ex-girlfriend and then just vanished. Jason suddenly suggests he might not be who she thinks he is. Amanda leaves completely puzzled. Meanwhile, in the parallel reality, Jason 2 welcomes the guests. He keeps conversations going, displaying knowledge of everyone's lives gleaned from social networks, and talks with his son. Jason 1 tries to answer Leighton's questions, who begins to suspect him of being an imposter. The man is beaten, forced to reveal the whereabouts of their Jason, but he knows nothing and cannot explain how the container works. Leighton asks him to strain his memory, as there might be a way to reach a world where cancer is cured. However, all is in vain. Daniela thanks her husband for the wonderful evening. She hasn't seen him like this in a long time, and he seems completely changed. At the same time in the parallel world, Ryan is thrown into Jason's room, horrified to learn of Daniela's death, as he was the one who told Leighton that Jason went to her. Ryan had created a drug for Jason that changes the chemical composition of the brain's cortex, temporarily putting some parts to sleep. Jason admits he is not the Jason Ryan knew in this world. The drug creates a special effect that, combined with the container, allows for traveling between worlds. Leighton's men take Ryan away. Meanwhile, in the parallel world, Jason too tells his wife he nearly died under the wheels, prompting him to reassess his life and express his gratitude for her presence. In the neighboring world, Amanda enters Jason's room, ordering him to follow her as she intends to get him out of there. They walk through the corridors but encounter a guard who raises the alarm. Jason and Amanda run to the container. They are chased, but Jason closes the iron door, cutting off Don's fingers. Amanda injects both herself and Jason with the drug that aids in transferring. Jason too, in the meantime, reviews family archives and finds a birth certificate of another son, Max. In an alternate world, Jason 1 and Amanda find themselves in a dark corridor with many doors. Leighton, angered by their disappearance, enters the container himself. Jason and Amanda proceed through the corridor, but all doors look the same. The man suggests the doors lead to other worlds. They step out into one and find themselves on the street of a dead city. There is ash and smoke everywhere. They look around and notice a house in front of them starting to crumble. They rush back to the container, barely making it. Coughing, Amanda shows a case with the remaining doses of the drug, 48 in total. According to the coordinates, the container stands in the same place as in her world, meaning only the external world changes. They inject themselves again and head to the next reality. Leighton also enters the corridor, searching for the pair, but without success so far. Jason too attends a lecture in place of his double, but realizing the students are uninterested, he leaves the auditorium, announcing his resignation. Jason 1 and Amanda step into another world and find themselves in a forest. They continue and enter a reality without an atmosphere after a nuclear explosion. The woman's nerves give way, but Jason explains it's a multiverse where everything that could happen did happen. They will soon need food and water, so they must find a habitable world. He opens another door, and the pair end up in the Velocity facility, witnessing Leighton and Don killing their doubles. Jason manages to push Amanda into the container and close the doors. Later, they open the next doors but find dead worlds everywhere. Exhausted, Amanda rushes through the first door she sees, with Jason hurrying after her. They find themselves in the midst of a snowstorm. The woman loses consciousness from the cold. Jason searches for a bunker but sees a house nearby. He breaks a window, carries Amanda inside, wraps her in a blanket, and lights a fire in the fireplace. Meanwhile, Jason too visits Leighton in his world. Here too, he is rich but spends his time idly. Jason offers him to become his investor in a very unusual venture. In the snowy world, Jason 1 steps outside and sees a completely frozen city. Jason 2 takes Leighton 2 to a bunker and offers him the substance. Jason 1 returns to the house, finds a family photograph of the owners, and remembers his own family. His wife pulls out a photo of their second son, who is no longer there. Amanda, warming up, learns that the container is buried in snow and finding it is impossible. She recalls being stuck in a snowstorm. Jason suddenly realizes this might have triggered their arrival in the frozen world. Perhaps they can choose where to move. Jason too shows Leighton to the container and promises to show him the path not taken. Instantly, the corridor with doors appears before them. Amanda and Jason, armed with probes, begin searching for the container in the snowdrifts. Suddenly, Amanda realizes that the compass always points in the same direction, indicating the container's approximate location. They head that way and soon find the box. In the neighboring universe, Daniela and Charlie walk to the memorial tree. Simultaneously, Jason starts telling Amanda about his second son. Daniela recounts the same story to Charlie. Once, Jason and Daniela were thrilled to learn they were expecting twins, but Max had a weak heart and died. They planted a tree, mixing their son's ashes with the soil. Every birthday, they sit under it and remember the boy. Leighton, too, meanwhile, is delighted by what he sees. Jason tells him about his life in the world where Leighton was his research partner. The tycoon agrees to fund his work. Jason 1 narrates his abduction to Amanda. He doesn't understand why his double went to such lengths. After questioning him about his life, Amanda suggests that the double simply wanted to fix Jason 1's life, making him happy while also taking what he himself lacked, a family. Daniela and Charlie discuss their father's strange behavior, but then Jason too arrives, congratulates his son on his birthday, and gives him car keys. To his stunned wife, he confesses he quit his job but assures her not to worry about money as he has returned to science and already found a sponsor. She can pursue her passion for painting. Jason 1 and Amanda experiment in front of the next door. Jason tries to set a mood, outlining the conditions for the next world. Everything should be peaceful and beautiful, but opening the door, the pair end up in water. The city is flooded. With great difficulty, they close the container door. Amanda asks him to analyze his feelings, and Jason thinks he understands the mistake, but the woman is convinced that lying won't work here. Later they rest, reminiscing about their loved ones. Amanda admits she loves special candies, but they don't exist in Jason's world. The woman reveals that the first to test the container was Engineer Blair, followed by 2 volunteers. Soon the drug's effect wears off. Amanda opens the door and the pair find themselves in the Velocity basement. Initially, they want to escape, but hunger takes over. They look around, but the cafeteria is closed and the elevator doesn't work. Amanda recalls a protocol designed for such a situation. They find a bedroom with someone lying under a blanket, but it's a shriveled body. It becomes clear that something terrible happened in this world. As they prepare to return to the container, a person with a gun stops them, but upon closer inspection, Amanda recognizes Blair. After joyful embraces, Jason tells Blair everything that happened. In his world, he knows her as his wife's friend, but there, she works as a lawyer. Blair leads them to a habitable area and offers them food. She arrived here 3 months ago when nothing worked. She managed to start the generators and access the system, discovering that Earth was overrun by creatures that devoured all living things. She went outside for food and saw the dead world. Blair also has drug vials but is not yet ready to leave. Jason 2 and Layton continue to explore the bunker. They compare their worlds, finding similarities and differences. Jason 2 explains that money varies between worlds, and carrying it is dangerous. One must be careful and honest. Blair reminds Amanda that Jason belongs to another world, so she must decide where she wants to be without considering him. Blair refuses to join them, not ready to re-enter the container. Layton, having visited the first world, is thrilled. Jason is ready to let him go, believing he has prepared him. Blair gives the pair her diary, describing the world she saw. Unfortunately, she has few vials left. Jason and Amanda leave. In the corridor, Amanda suddenly cries. Jason 2 ruined lives, knowing how to use the container. Jason 1 consoles her. Emboldened, Layton promises Jason 2 $1 million for the next doses of the drug. Jason 1 decides to write in Blair's diary what he wants to see behind the next door. He thinks the method worked, and they finally arrived in his world. But stepping outside, they notice unusual emptiness. They manage to open a car and drive to his house. The door is opened by a haggard Daniela. She says Jason was taken to the hospital and the deceased, Charlie, lies in his room. The man runs outside, encountering a medical patrol. A female doctor goes inside, while another doctor performs a rapid test on Jason. The returning doctor says hospitals are full, and Daniela is better off dying at home. The end is near. The virus spreads through body fluids, so Jason should avoid touching Daniela. She gives him several morphine injections, advising him to ease his wife's passing. Amanda tries to keep him from entering the house, reminding him that this is not his world and not his wife. But Jason returns. They reminisce about good moments that turn out to be very similar in both worlds. Then the woman takes the syringe. Jason and Amanda return to the container. The woman reminds him that they were talking about Jason's mother's illness. That's why they ended up in a world dying from a pandemic. The pair continues on. They arrive in a world that, at first glance, doesn't differ from Jason's. Meanwhile, Jason 2 apologizes to his wife for the unilateral decision to buy their son a car. The woman points out that such things are becoming more frequent. Her husband seems to be distancing from her, even missing the gathering at the tree. He tells her about Layton, who will pay huge sums for his discoveries. Jason enters his house, but upon hearing voices upstairs, he grabs a knife from the kitchen. Daniela screams in fear upon seeing him, and Charlie rushes into the room. They both act as if they are mortally afraid of Jason. The woman grabs the phone and tells emergency services that her arrested husband has come to her with a knife. Charlie shouts at him to leave. Frightened, Jason exits the house as a siren sounds in the distance. Amanda takes him to her friend, but the friend is horrified. In this world, Amanda is dead, and the friend mourns her deeply. Amanda tells her that she is in a better world and then takes the car keys. They drive to the container. In Jason 2's world, the container opens, and he steps out, retrieving backpacks with drugs. A lab assistant who rushes out tells him about his double's appearance and his escape with Amanda. Jason 2 returns to the corridor, where he hands doses to Layton. He then informs him that he will have to seal this world. Daniela from Jason's original world starts painting, and her husband's double is thrilled, suggesting she leave the gallery and focus solely on painting, especially since the deal with Leighton is sealed. Later he picks up their son and treats him to ice cream with nuts, not knowing the boy is allergic to them. Daniela can't understand how he could forget such a thing. Then she notices injection marks on his arms. In the evening, he uses dental floss, something he has never done, and Daniela becomes increasingly puzzled. Jason 1 and Amanda continue searching for his world, but they keep finding discrepancies. A different door color, a dog's presence, the absence of the memory tree, and similar things. Amanda suggests they rest at a hotel and have dinner at a normal cafe. Over the meal, they laugh a lot and then dance. At night, Jason hugs Amanda but stops, realizing they are not together. Jason 2 visits a psychotherapist who turns out to be Amanda's double. He talks about his relationship with Daniela and the disappointments he has faced. She suddenly reminds him that expectations can be overly high. Daniela complains to her friend Blair about his strange changes, and Blair advises her to keep an eye on her husband. In the evening, Jason asks his wife to wear a new dress and takes her to the gallery where he has hung her painting. Instead of gratitude, Daniela is horrified and asks to be taken home. She is very angry about his unilateral action, which she feels has humiliated her. Jason admits he never really knew her and is trying to make her happy against her wishes. Leaving his wife at home, he drives away, unaware that she is following him. Soon, they arrive at a warehouse where Daniela sees a locker her husband uses. Waiting for him to leave, she takes out a couple of vials lying on the floor. Later, she gives one to Ryan, asking him to analyze the drug. Meanwhile, Jason 1 finds the Daniela of this world. She also runs a gallery but doesn't recognize him during their conversation. Amanda also finds her double, but here the woman is married and has a son. At night, Jason goes to his house and watches his wife embrace his copy. Amanda, in the meantime, describes her ideal world. When Jason returns, a quarrel ensues because Amanda loses faith that they will find his world, as they only have 10 vials left. Ryan accuses Jason 2 of stealing his research, as the drug in his vial is identical to his own. Jason 2 takes his friend to the container. He injects the drug into himself and Ryan ends up in the corridor with doors to other worlds. Realizing he is in a quantum state, he is thrilled. Jason explains how to tune into another reality, and upon opening a door, Ryan sees a fantastically beautiful Chicago. This world is kinder and more progressive because Jason made it so for his friend. He asks for Ryan's phone to take a picture of him and steps back to the door. Ryan realizes this is not his friend. Jason just closes the door, leaving the man in another world. Later, he sees that Daniela is calling Ryan. Then Leighton's men arrive and pack up the container. Sometime later, a detective comes to Jason's house, investigating Ryan's disappearance. The couple tells her about their last encounters with the friend, and Jason 2 suddenly states that Ryan drank a lot, although he never drank alcohol. After this, Daniela shows him the remaining vial and confesses she has been following him. He explains that Ryan made the drug for Jason 2's research because he is reviving his project. Amanda leads Jason 1 into a world she has imagined. This Chicago is beautiful. They walk through a clean and cozy city, enjoying friendly faces. They drink cocoa from edible cups and then have a snack in a cafe where they learn about a trendy restaurant in the tallest tower in the city. Amanda leaves, setting up a meeting with Jason there. A nearby couple gives him a photo they took, admiring them. Later, Jason goes to the restaurant and sees Amanda in an evening dress. She gives him a suit she bought for him, and he changes and joins her. Jason gives her her favorite candies, which exist in this world. She laughs, saying he is an insurance agent here. Her double in this world disappeared 2 years ago. Taking advantage of their identical appearance, Amanda made a passport and gained access to the double's savings, so she decided to stay here. She invites Jason to join her, but he declines. Before leaving, Jason secretly places 2 of the remaining vials in her purse. Amanda cries in the elevator, but, seeing the sun, wipes her tears and heads into a new life. Jason goes to the container. He has only 3 vials left, and the next world is destroyed. He continues, and in the next reality, he calls his wife. She is surprised, as she just saw him off to work, but Jason confesses his love to her. At night, he sneaks into his house and sees Daniela hugging his copy, but going down to the kitchen, he encounters his son, and it is not Charlie. It turns out that here they managed to save Max by transplanting the heart of a deceased girl, and now he suffers from guilt. Jason 1 comforts him. Meanwhile, Jason 2 confesses to the psychotherapist Amanda that he wants to pack up and leave his wife. Then suddenly he tells very personal things about the doctor herself. She kicks him out, but outside, Jason 2 is met by a detective. They tracked Ryan's phone and know that after the bar, he went to the industrial part of the city, so she intends to check all the cameras located there. Jason 2 goes to the container and breaks the formwork. He finds Ryan's double in the first world, where he works as a simple mechanic, gets him drunk, brings him to his world, cleans him up, and puts him to sleep in Ryan's bed. Jason 1 takes out the last vial and writes in Blair's diary his memories of the first meeting with Daniela. He saw the living Max and even thought of treating his double in that world as he had been treated. But he realized he only wants his family, his home, and his life. Jason 1 opens the door and finally arrives in his world. He heads home, checking all the details along the way, but upon approaching the house, he sees himself telling Daniela that he found Ryan in a wild drunken state. He had to clean his friend up and take him home. Jason 1 goes to a store to buy a gun, but without a permit, he buys pepper spray and a hunting knife. A minute later, Jason 2 enters the same store and repeats his double's actions. The stunned shop assistant remarks that they were just discussing buying a gun. She asks if he has a twin brother. Realizing his prototype has returned, Jason 2 runs outside but finds no one. Friends, if you've watched this far, pay closer attention because the most confusing part of the plot is about to begin. He returns home where Charlie informs him that Mom went to Ryan, who is behaving very strangely. Jason 2 goes outside and is attacked by another Jason in a hat, whom he kills in a fight. Meanwhile, Ryan, seeing Daniela, claims that he is an auto mechanic and repairs her car in his world, not a scientist chemist. He recalls a man offering him alcohol and recognizes Jason from a photo. Jason checks his gear and stepping into the hallway encounters himself, but the double runs away, and Jason gives chase. At this time, Jason 2 loads the body of the killed double into a car, and Jason 1 catches up with his double in a bar. They realize that their copies multiply in a container, and it's unclear how many there could be, but they all aimed for this particular Chicago, as their prototype was desperate to get home. Amanda appeared in all realities. Only in one did she die in a terrible world. And for Jason 1, she remained in the best world. Both are out of vials and cannot help each other. Jason 3 suggests getting rid of the one who caused all this. Jason 2 doesn't know about the place where they both love to rest. They need to lure the villain there and kill him. Besides, Jason 3 has already dug a grave there, and he also has a gun. The next morning, Jason 1 goes to the bar, where he lights a cigar despite the strict prohibition. He is taken to the police station. Meanwhile, Daniela plans to take her husband's large car to move some things to the gallery, but he rudely forbids her, and Jason 2 drives his son to the university, showing him memorable places on the campus when he notices Jason 3 watching them. Daniela goes to the storage box again and breaking the doors, finds bags with unknown currency, a box of vials, and Ryan's jacket. But then she gets a call from the police. Jason 2 guides Charlie through the building and their pursuer loses sight of them. The father asks his son to take the car and meet him at another exit, even though he doesn't have a license yet. Confused, Charlie leaves, and Jason 2 tries to throw Jason 3 off his trail, but he also knows the university building well. Eventually, the men engage in a fight, and the second Jason wins. Charlie makes a failed maneuver, attracting a policeman's attention, and Jason 2 knocks out the third and locks him in a toilet stall. Meanwhile, the policeman demands Charlie's license, but at that moment, Jason 2 appears, managing to persuade the officer to let them go. At this moment, Daniela sees her husband at the station. It turns out Jason was looking for a place where they could talk safely. He tells his wife the truth, but she doesn't believe him. Then Jason suggests calling him. Daniela dials her husband's number, and Jason answers. She hangs up, then Jason asks her to call again and remind him of their great vacation in Miami, though they never actually went there. Daniela does this, adding made-up details about the vacation, and that Jason agrees, pretending to remember the trip. Now Daniela believes her real husband, who says there are other versions of him. They agree on a code word in a meeting place, and Daniela goes to get their son. But at home she finds her husband, Jason 2, who orders her to pack because they need to leave urgently. The mother tries to talk to her son, but Jason 2 is on guard and doesn't let them do it. The woman leaves supposedly to get a suitcase and messages Charlie. The boy leaves first, and Daniela lures her husband into the basement and pushes him down the stairs. They drive away, but another car with yet another Jason behind the wheel cuts them off. Daniela realizes this is another version of her husband. At this moment, they are rammed by a car driven by yet another Jason. Daniela and Charlie flee. Soon they reach the place where Jason 1 is waiting for them. He says the code word and hugs his son. Meanwhile, Jason's family leaves the city. Suddenly, Daniela and Charlie start receiving messages from numerous other Jasons, assuring them that only they can protect them. The woman turns off the gadgets. Her husband can't choose a place where they can hide, as the other Jasons might also guess where to look for them. Then Charlie takes over and shows the way to a friend's vacant house. Charlie is puzzled by the number of fathers, as, theoretically, they all are his father in some way. Jason suggests they sleep first and then make decisions. Daniela sympathizes with his adventures, but those other Jasons are suffering too. The woman goes to bed, while Jason checks his email and suddenly sees an entire chat of 44 Jasons arguing over who gets Daniela and Charlie. In the morning, Jason finds his wife on the beach. She admits that at first, she liked the new Jason, but gradually she realized he wasn't the one she loved. Her husband tells her he sometimes thought about a new life. Apparently Jason too also thought about this, so he moved to their world. He recalls Daniela number 2, who became an artist, lived in a luxurious apartment, and had lots of friends. Jason 3 also studies the chat, trying to figure out where his double went. Suddenly he gets a message from Blair asking to return the car. He realizes Daniela borrowed a car from a friend and asks her to come urgently. At this time, Jason tells his wife about the chat, and one of them suggesting to raffle her and Charlie in a lottery. Jason too questions the third about what happened to him in other worlds. He tells about the death of Daniela and Ryan and the suffering of Amanda, who loved that Jason very much. In the reality of the third Jason, she died in the forest, impaled by a giant tree branch. Jason too begins to understand the horror of his actions, as he hoped to make his double happy with a new life. Meanwhile, Charlie prepares breakfast and tells Jason the latest news from their life, deciding where to go next. At this time, Blair arrives at their house and finds Jason 3 tied up in a closet. The third attacks her and demands to track her car, but Blair manages to neutralize him and demands to tell her the truth about the ongoing madness. Jason tells his wife and son about other realities. They are amazed that their doubles live in a few microns away, unseen by them. Jason admits that there was one world where he almost stayed but couldn't imagine life without his family. Later, Daniela reads his chat. They spend the night together, reminiscing about their first meeting. She admits she made a choice and informed the other Jasons. But later, Jason suddenly sees a shadow outside the window, and going outside, finds an injured double, who says he was hit by one of them. There are many of them here, and it won't end just like that. Gunshots are heard in the dark, and Jason asks his wife to run to their son, but then another armed double calls out to him, demanding his clothes and the code word. Jason 1 charges at him. A fight ensues, but a shot rings out, and the double falls. It turns out to be Jason 2, who realized his guilt. He asks for their forgiveness, gives them car keys, and asks them to leave. The family drives into the night, while the second Jason shoots back at the other doubles, giving them a chance to escape. Here they find a suitcase with a device for traveling between worlds in the car, and a phone with a recorded message, in which Jason 2 admits that he entered the container full of regret about the world where the family he didn't create lived, and now he offers to find them a new home in another world. The family heads to the container, where they are met by dozens of Jason doubles who understood that the woman made a choice and came to say goodbye. The family walks into the container through the line of Jasons. There, they trust Charlie to choose a new world where they will all be happy. Charlie opens the door and steps into another reality, followed by his parents. This concludes the first season.
One day, an 11th grader named Nikolai comes to school and immediately gets into trouble with his classmate Victor. Victor is upset about an unflattering comment about their mutual love interest, Nastya, appearing on the board. Victor drags Kolya to the classroom, but Kolya tells everyone that this is nothing compared to what awaits them in the future. After all, an alien spaceship is already on its way to Earth. However, the pilot made a mistake and arrived in the wrong place, accidentally catching the signal of Kolya's best friend and avid gamer, Fima. Thanks to this mistake, Earth will soon join the Star Federation, which will immediately accelerate progress in all areas of knowledge and medicine. But in 2110, military conflicts will begin with the Cosmic Pirate Alliance, led by Glot, who can travel through time. Humans had a tough time until a special squad led by Kira was sent into battle. She will reach Glot and sacrifice herself to destroy him. Kira will leave behind a daughter, Alice, who will study at the same school as Kolya, but 100 years in the future. However, Alice finds studying completely uninteresting. Some of her classmates of alien origin pay attention to her and offer friendship, but the girl's mind is occupied with entirely different thoughts. On this day, she returns from school, greets the robot Werther, and shows off new bracelets that allow for creating combat simulations. Werther immediately helps her pass a level, fighting 3 space pirates at once. At the most inopportune moment, her father, Professor Seleznev, appears in the simulation and gets hit in the nose. Alice immediately stops the fight and helps the injured. Here, the father notices the bracelet, which turns out to be sent from the military academy named after her mother, where she applied for admission. The man is outraged by her decision, but Alice reminds him that after the battle, her mother's body was never found, so she could very well be somewhere in the past. Alice takes her father to the tree growing in the middle of his bio-laboratory. An unmistakable heart silhouette, 100 years old, is visible on the bark. Could this be a message from her mother? Moreover, the robot has already found a similar woman in the past, a physics teacher from Moscow named Margarita. Coincidentally, she turns out to be Kolya's teacher, and in her time, she is rushing to the classroom where the boys are sorting things out. Understanding the situation, the teacher stops the fight. Kolya gets a reprimand and is ordered to erase the nasty comment he wrote on the board. Kolya and Fima go to the classroom, but the permanent marker doesn't come off, and Kolya decides to find a more effective solution in the lab. He breaks the doors, climbs to the top shelf where some vials are stored, and drops a water-filled lens, but it falls to the floor in a kind of slow motion. Kolya tries to find an explanation for this effect. Examining the wall, he finds a hidden safe, from which he takes out a box containing something strange, resembling a small galaxy. Suddenly, this object gets absorbed into Kolya's palm and he starts to convulse, while a voice whispers to him that the Cosmian has reappeared in the system. Terrified, Kolya runs into the corridor, and then outside, but the schoolyard around is completely different. There are many aliens around the school. Eventually, Kolya bumps into Alice, who, without understanding, performs a move and throws the boy to the ground. He sees the girl and is at a loss for words. Then he complains of feeling unwell, causing the girl to laugh. Is his biodata chip not working? Kolya doesn't understand her sarcasm and asks to call an ambulance. Alice then realizes that something is wrong with the boy. Besides, he is dressed very strangely. Kolya shows his pass, a badge, and the girl asks him to look around. Realizing that this is the future, the boy loses consciousness. Meanwhile, in a space prison, a pirate named Jolly, because he is always laughing, escapes from his cell, comes to the cell of the space pirate Glot, and admits that he has been recognized as the captain of the Alliance. But Glot reminds him that without the Cosmian, they won't be able to conquer even the most underdeveloped planet. He can feel its waves and can find it. Jolly agrees to cooperate and frees Glot. Glot uses his mental powers to force the guards to self-destruct, and the pirates escape. Meanwhile, Kolya regains consciousness and is frightened by the robot Werther. Alice confirms that it is the year 2124. She shows him a view of a futuristic city with blooming sakura and white bridges. The temperature is now controlled by humans. Machines are used as needed. The meat they eat is artificial. At this time, Professor Seleznev comes to the laboratory. Learning that the boy somehow traveled from the past, he begins the analysis and finds that Kolya's body contains a cluster of exotic matter with variable gravity, what they call the Cosmian. Kolya explains where and how he found this object. Learning that his physics teacher is named Margarita, Alice immediately understands that this is her mother. After this news, the father shows Alice a letter. In it, the missing wife explains that because of the Cosmian, she ended up in 2014. The problem is that with its help, one can only move exactly 100 years. Kira changed her details and hid securely so that the pirates wouldn't find her. She asks her daughter to look after her father, and she will always be proud of her. Alice runs out of the room in tears. Kolya rushes after her. Alice, sitting under the tree, tells her virtual father everything she thinks about him. Werther leads Kolya to this place and explains that meeting oneself in another time leads to a continuum failure. And then the space pirates appear. Glot captures Kolya with his mental power, but Werther manages to activate the alarm signal. Glot reports that they can't take the Cosmian while the boy is alive, and the pirate Jolly prepares his weapon. But Alice rushes into the fight, using bionic arms. The professor appears, trying to stop the fight. However, Kolya, obeying Glot's mental power, shoots the professor. An energy release occurs, and reality begins to change. Alice, Kolya, and the pirates find themselves in the middle of a highway in 2024. Alice and Kolya run away, and Jolly chases them, jumping on cars. Werther helps the kids, and when the pirate catches up with the pair and stabs Alice with a sword, it turns out to be her hologram. Then the pirate cuts the robot in half. Angry, he complains to Glot, but Glot takes control of a motorcyclist and knocks his partner down. However, Jolly gets up and finds Kolya's pass card on the road. Now he knows which school he attends and plans to do without Glot. Meanwhile, Kolya and Alice ride away from this place by subway. Kolya takes the girl to his home. He explains to his mother that Alice lost her keys and cannot stay outside, and she allows the girl to stay overnight. At night, Kolya admits that he writes texts and performs rap dedicated to Alice. This makes an impression on her. Meanwhile, Jolly tries to get to the school, but taxi drivers take him for a lunatic. So Jolly grabs a smartphone with a mapped route from one of the taxi drivers and heads to the place on foot. And physics teacher Kira sees a news report about the incident on the road and recognizes the pirate Jolly. The next morning, Kolya brings Alice to school, where Nastya mistakes her for his new girlfriend and starts to harass the couple, not letting them pass. Then Kolya sees his physics teacher Kira, catches up with her, and starts telling her what happened. But the woman notices Fima and is puzzled because he should be at Kolya's apartment playing. The conversation is interrupted by the appearance of Jolly, who, seeing Kira, proposes to settle the matter peacefully. But the woman engages in a fight. The pair wreck everything around, and eventually, Kira ends up in the physics classroom, where Alice, Kolya, Fima, Nastya, and her new boyfriend Victor are hiding. They barricade themselves inside, Jolly breaks in, and Alice asks Kolya to take them to the future. But to activate the Cosmian, strong emotions need to be evoked in Kolya. And when the pirate breaks through the wall, Alice kisses Kolya. Temporal vortices start immediately. Taking advantage of the pirate's confusion, Kira cuts off his arm. The whole team is transported to the future. However, it is not at all a wonderful place. The school is destroyed and battle robots are flying outside. Kira hits one of them with a sword and its outer mask falls off, revealing the robot assistant Werther underneath. He explains why the world has changed. It turns out that in the original story, Fima, on the day of Kolya's first transfer to the future, went to his apartment to play in a gaming tournament and accidentally received the signal from the lost alien courier, which led Earth to join the Star Federation. But in the new reality, Glot, who ended up in the past, directed Fima to school instead of the tournament and took the signal himself. Earth turned into a Pirate Alliance outpost, enslaving humanity and forcing them to work for a bowl of soup. Werther leads the team to Jolly, who has hardly aged over 100 years. It turns out that he was the one who saved Werther, disguising him as a pirate bot. Kira doesn't believe the pirate, but he convinces the team that he is now on their side. And all these years, he has been craving revenge on Glot for betraying him, although by the oath, he cannot harm him personally. If they destroy Glot, everything will return to normal. 100 years ago, Fima received the signal. So they need to go to Kolya's apartment and stop Glot in the past. Kira, Kostya, and Jolly head to Kolya's apartment to thwart Glot's plan. Meanwhile, Fima suddenly wonders why Glot didn't track their move. The friends conclude that it is a trap, and indeed, they fall into a pirate ambush. Their friends rush to their rescue, and Victor destroys the attackers with a bomb found on Jolly. But it also collapses a huge building on the street. Frightened Kolya tries to save his friends and moves them to the past, to their time. But he returns to the future, where a fierce battle with the surviving pirates is underway. Jolly locks Kira in a room, taking the blows on himself and receiving a fatal wound. Glot appears, happy to announce that he is now free from the oath. He waits for his former comrade to die. In the past, Kolya's friends run to his apartment, where they find Glot. In the future, Kolya, Kira, and Alice also arrive at Kolya's apartment. He tries to move to the future, causing the realities to fluctuate, merging and diverging. In the past, friends beat each other on Glot's orders. And in the future, also under Glot's influence, Alice starts to strangle Kolya. She tries to resist Glot's mental command, but she can't. Kolya dies. Glot of the future receives the Cosmian. Alice, freed from his influence, rushes to revive Kolya, but it's all in vain. But when the girl starts crying over him, he suddenly opens his eyes. At this time, Glot absorbs the Cosmian. Alice tells him that her mother is still alive and she can defeat him again. But he reminds her that 100 years ago, in this apartment, he killed Kira and Kolya's friends. Kolya disputes with Glot, claiming that in the past, his friends can still defeat the pirate. Angered, Glot offers him to see it for himself and moves them to 100 years ago in the past. But when Glot, Alice, and Kolya arrive in 2024, the future Glot meets the past Glot, causing a continuum failure, making Glot multiply first and then disappear. This was Kolya's plan. The unclaimed Cosmian begins to work on its own until Kolya reaches for it. However, the resulting anomaly throws Alice and Kira into 2124. Kolya ends up in an intertemporal space, from where he is thrown into his 2024. He wakes up in a hospital, where the jubilant Fema reports that he managed to receive the signal from the alien courier, and this restored history to its original course. Kolya realizes that the Cosmian inside him is gone, and now he can no longer travel through time, and he will never see Alice again. Meanwhile, Alice and Kira find themselves at their home and see their husband and father alive and well. It turns out Kolya wrote him a warning letter that was delivered 100 years later, and he managed to substitute his hologram under the pirate's shot. Later, Kolya and his friends plant a tree as a symbol of caring for the future. Kolya draws a heart on the tree, and Alice receives this message in the future, understanding that the boy remembers her. This is where the movie ends.
In a cabin in the middle of the forests of North Carolina, two people live, a woman named Nydia and her blind son Solomon. The only thing left from the father, a hunter, is an audio recording where he explains to the boy that they were forced to move to this place in the hope that his mother would be able to heal. But the hope was in vain. Nydia's condition only worsened. On that day, the mother calls her son to check the traps. Before leaving the house, the boy habitually ties a rope to his belt, the other end of which is attached to the porch. This measure is necessary so that the child can always find his way home, and so that the mother knows in which direction to look for him if something happens. The woman teaches Solomon how to set and find traps for animals, and approves of how quickly he learns. Later, she shows him how to properly skin animals without damaging the fur, which can then be used to make clothing. One day, the curious boy catches an insect and traps it in a jar, only to be saddened when he notices that the beetle no longer makes any sound. The mother explains that living creatures cannot survive like this. They need air, food, and water. One day, the woman suggests that the child go fishing to celebrate the birthday of his deceased father, who loved this activity and always took Solomon with him. Afterward, she plans to bake a cake, which excites the boy. The pair head to the river. Suddenly, Solomon notes that all the animals and birds seem to have disappeared, and a ringing silence surrounds them. The woman, who also notices this, jokes that they were scared of the boy and warn the fish in the river. The boy relaxes, but the unpleasant feeling remains in his soul. Sitting by the shore, he suddenly asks questions about death. Nydia is surprised but explains that death is simply a change of existence, like a chrysalis turning into a butterfly. Life continues but in a different form. But why is Solomon interested in this? After all, he is young, full of energy, and will live for a long time. After sitting by the shore with their fishing rods and not getting a bite, the woman suggests that the boy dig up some worms. He happily agrees and ventures deeper into the forest. The boy finds some worms near a rotten tree and feels an iron chain under the leaves. But as soon as he tries to pull it to find out where it leads, the mother arrives, sensing something suspicious in the forest. She praises her son for finding the worms, but suggests they finish fishing for the day. The pair return home, where the mother tends to the household chores, the garden and the goat, which provides them with milk. Solomon helps dig up root vegetables. The mother praises her son for his help, hiding that she feels worse and worse. In the evening, she bakes the promised cake and suggests that her son sing the traditional song, but the boy doesn't like it. Then Nydia offers to let him blow out the candle on the cake in front of him, and Solomon fulfills the request, but he refuses to share his wish, believing it won't come true if he does. At night, the mother plays an audio recording she and the boy's father made for little Solomon. They tell a story about a little goat that once ran into the forest where a terrible monster lived. The parents loved their little goat very much and were inconsolable, but the goat, seeing the monster, managed to escape and return home, bringing great joy to his mother and father. They hugged him, and he promised never to return to the dark forest again. After listening to the story again, Solomon again raises the question of death, as he didn't understand his mother's earlier explanation. Then Nydia tells him about faith. However, the boy barely understands and declares that he believes in his mother above all else. The years pass, but one day the mother disappears, leaving the boy only a recording of her voice, in which she says goodbye to her son and reminds him of the 3 main rules of their life. He must always share with the forest everything he gets from it, half for him, half for the forest. The second rule, when he feels down and ready to give up, he must sing their song. And the third rule, he must never take off the rope. Time passes. Solomon becomes a teenager. He has fully adapted to life alone, hunting, fishing, chopping wood, and checking traps on his own. When he feels particularly sad, he listens to the tapes with the voices of his loved ones. One day while eating near the house, the boy hears a strange sound from the thicket. Putting down his plate, he rushes into the forest but finds nothing unusual, though he senses someone's presence nearby. Before bed, he listens to his mother's voice recording again. However, he cannot sleep. The boy gets up and leaves the house. Then he hears the plaintive bleating of his goat and runs towards the sound until the rope reaches its limit. At the very edge of the rope's reach, he manages to feel the goat's body in the grass, but at that moment, something unknown grabs the animal and drags it into the depths of the forest. Feeling his hands, the boy realizes they are covered in blood and tries to wipe it off. Morning comes. Solomon is frightened but continues to live according to his established routine, but one day he suddenly hears a gunshot in the forest. The boy rushes in that direction and stumbles upon a dead deer. But then, a man emerges from the trees, claiming it as his kill. Frightened, Solomon begins to wave his knife, and the stranger is forced to knock him out with the butt of his rifle. The boy comes to his senses, near his house. The hunter, sitting opposite, tends to his wound, apologizing for the harm caused. He read the name on the knife, Lucas, and assumes that's the boy's name. But the boy admits that it was his father's name, who is now gone. The hunter apologizes again, saying he didn't mean to scare him, and noticing the rope, he carried him back to the house. Hank, the man's name, asks the young man why he lives alone and where his parents are, as the boy looks very young. But Solomon doesn't answer. The day is already ending, so the hunter asks for permission to spend the night in the house. In return, he offers some painkillers. When the boy refuses, as he doesn't know what pills are, Hank promises to cook a hot meal from the deer, and Solomon agrees. Hank examines the house from the inside and realizes that the young man has never left its boundaries and therefore simply doesn't know about the outside world. Meanwhile, the boy listens to his mother's last message, huddled in the corner of his room, feeling uncomfortable in the presence of a stranger. Hank finds homemade books that Solomon's mother made for him and feels sorry for the boy. He behaves kindly and generously offers the young man the soup he prepared. He again offers to help the boy, saying he can guide him to people and help him settle into the big world. But Solomon refuses, which Hank attributes to his deep love for home, lamenting that he himself doesn't have one. He again asks about the parents, saying the boy looks a lot like the woman in the photo, perhaps that is his mother. After dinner, they go to bed, though Solomon doesn't part with his knife, but realizing that Hank poses no threat, he finally lies down. However, in the middle of the night, both are awakened by a loud and terrifying sound, similar to the roar of an unknown animal. Hank, armed with a flashlight and rifle, goes outside to check what's happening. It's quiet around the house, and the man heads into the forest. Soon he finds blood traces at the base of a tree and realizes that some animal has died there. On the tree itself there are bloody marks and the bark is scraped off. Stopping, Hank surveys the area through his scope and notices something suspicious in the bushes. He fires, but the creature leaps from behind the tree with a terrifying roar and charges at him. Realizing he missed, the hunter runs. Reaching the house, he sees Solomon in some sort of trance. The boy just sways from side to side, humming a tune to himself, and doesn't respond to the man's questions. Hank, getting no answers, leaves him alone. After all, he believes he scared off the beast, and now they are safe. The man promises to get the boy out of the forest so he can live a normal life, unafraid of any monster. In the morning, Hank finds Solomon in the shed. He offers to repair it since all the necessary materials are there, except for the chain. Solomon recalls finding a chain in the forest as a child and takes Hank to the spot. The man marvels at how the boy navigates using the rope. The boy explains that it's the only way to survive. Soon they find the place. Hank, noticing the chain, grabs it and starts pulling, but realizing it's tied to something, he follows it and finds some kind of burrow. Nearby lie metal shears, which surprises Hank. However, he cuts off a piece of the chain and returns with it to the house. While the man works on the repairs, Solomon asks for a piece of venison, and after receiving permission, throws it into the bushes. To the hunter's surprise, the boy explains that it's a rule. Everything taken from the forest must be shared with it, as his parents taught him. The hunter believes this practice explains the appearance of the beast they heard at night. He suggests they set a trap for the monster to ensure the boy's safety. He also extends the rope, giving the young man the ability to explore new areas. Soon they both head in the direction where Hank saw the unknown beast. Cautiously moving between the trees, they reach the edge of the previously marked area. Suddenly, something unknown grabs the rope and starts pulling Solomon. The terrified hunter chases after the boy, and catching up with the abandoned Solomon, immediately leads him back to the house. Hank tries to calm the young man, assuring him that the beast won't enter the house and they will definitely catch it in the traps they set. He also found his mother's diary and offers to read it to Solomon. The boy listens intently, a thoughtful smile appearing as he hears the lines filled with love and tenderness directed at him. But suddenly Hank stops reading mid-sentence, having read something terrifying. Not wanting to scare the boy, he assures him it's already late and they should go to sleep. As always, Solomon listens to his mother's recording before bed and then goes to sleep. Meanwhile, Hank, making sure the boy's asleep, leaves the house and heads to the place where they found the chain. He approaches the burrow, sees a pile of gnawed bones in front of it, and realizes that this is the lair of the beast. Meanwhile, Solomon wakes up and begins to search for his new friend, and Hank, with his rifle ready, approaches the burrow and suddenly sees a notebook similar to the one in Solomon's house. But this one is scribbled with simple doodles. Deciding that the find has no value, the man puts it back. Meanwhile, realizing that Hank is not around, Solomon sits on the porch and turns on the tape recorder, listening to his mother's voice. But at that moment, he hears a gunshot in the forest. Finding the rope, Solomon runs into the forest, where he suddenly stumbles over Hank's backpack and realizes that the man is somewhere nearby. At that moment, the rope's length ends. For the first time in his life, Solomon breaks the rule and takes it off to find his friend. He crawls around and finds Hank's lifeless body. Solomon mourns his loss when he hears someone standing before him. The terrifying, disheveled creature turns out to be Solomon's mother. Making inhuman sounds, she charges at him, but the chain restrains her. To drive away his fear, Solomon begins to hum the childhood melody. This makes the woman stop, and when she begins to hum along, the boy recognizes her. He cautiously approaches her, and when she lunges at him, she impales herself on a knife and dies. Her eyes, with strange vertical pupils, go still. The young man, coughing heavily, leans against a tree. Trying to recover from everything he's been through, he suddenly hears a crow cawing and looks up at the sky. And then, in his milky eyes, vertical pupils appear, meaning that along with his sight, he has inherited his mother's illness, becoming the new forest beast. A depressingly dull film that exudes hopelessness, cold, and a sense of inevitable futility. But the metaphor with the rope is very apt. A person should never lose their connection to home. One day, the ruler of the Murakami province receives a warning from a neighboring feudal lord who has decided to seize a mountain to build a castle there. However, Lord Murakami orders the messenger to be killed and prepares to defend the village. Sometime later, the mountain is besieged by the neighbor's army, confident in victory and mocking the lord, whose face is hidden behind a mask. He sends his soldiers into battle, but the small group led by the Lord standing before them extends their hands forward and the entire army falls, destroyed by an unknown weapon that literally pierces their bodies. Present day. At a university, a group of students studying paranormal abilities gathers. One of them, Yoji Minami Maru, nicknamed Nanmaru, possesses a small supernatural power, the ability to create tiny holes in everything, which he demonstrates on a stack of paper. The young people are impressed by his skill, but Nanmaru himself doesn't consider it useful since he can't even find a job. Just then he receives a summons from Professor Murakami and heads to the Department of History and Folklore, where he meets lecturer Emi, who is worried about the professor's absence. Murakami had gone on a research trip and disappeared. The woman is surprised by the boy's last name and asks about his family, but he can't recall anything of interest. Meanwhile, in the town of Marukawa, located on Mount Murakami, a girl named Sachiko wakes up from a nightmare. Her grandmother brings her milk and tries to calm her down. Back at the Paranormal Enthusiasts Club, there's a disagreement, and one of the boys remarks on the uselessness of Nanmaru's ability. The boy gets upset and recalls how his grandfather taught him to punch tiny holes in objects by shouting, believing his grandson was special. At this moment, he is found by student Emi, Tagai. The thing is, Emi, while researching his genealogy, discovered a common ancestor in the boy's family and the professor's. She asked Nanmaru to help search for him, as the last case Murakami studied was the murder of their ancestor. The boy's parents can't help since their family moved away from there a long time ago. In the morning, they show him a model of the village made by Tagai, and Emi tells an ancient legend in which Nanmaru's ancestor betrayed Lord Murakami, leading to his death in battle. However, the professor found a written account that during the battle, all the enemies perished, with only one person on Murakami's side. And 10 days later, a festival took place on this spot, which would be very strange if the residents had betrayed and killed their lord. Tagai draws everyone's attention to the shape of the mountains around the village, as if they were artificially created. But who could have done such a thing back then? Later, Nanmaru demonstrates his ability to his new friends, which greatly impresses them. Meanwhile, in the town of Marukawa, an official notices a strange black circle on a window pane. He reaches out, and his hand seems to be cut off, and then the man's head splits, as if struck by a spherical object. At the university, Emi asks Nanmaru to show his ability and tells him that the professor also learned to punch holes in objects before he disappeared. However, they were much larger. At this point, the boy suggests that the ability might have come from their common ancestor. At that moment, everyone hears the news about the murder of the official in Marukawa. Nanmaru suggests they search for the professor themselves. The action returns to medieval times. Lord Murakami vows not to let anyone invade his lands. His fingers begin to extend, and strange round marks appear on his wrists. Present day. The students, along with Emi, arrive in Marukawa and begin searching for the professor, but no one has seen him. However, the young people find armor with round holes in the local museum, and on the local lord's banner, they notice the image of a magpie, a human hand, and a circle, the meaning of which no one knows. They discover that after Minamimara's death, his lord gave his youngest son to his family so the lineage would not die out. So Nanmaru is a descendant of the lord himself. They question people on the street, but no one has seen the professor. Soon the students find the building where the murder occurred, and for the first time wonder if Nanmaru's ability could punch through window glass. At a cafe, the group learns about the upcoming Tanabata festival. The men sitting at a nearby table suddenly mention that the professor's presence will make the festival unforgettable and lead to the lord's revival. Tagai asks questions, but the men pretend to know nothing about the professor. Then they hear Nanmaru's name and become excited. Later, the friends joke about how the locals consider Nanmaru to be the lord and practically worship him. Emi reminds them that Tanabata is Japan's Day of Lovers, celebrated on July 7th. On this night, the stars Vega in the constellation Lyra and Altair in the constellation Aquila, separated by the Milky Way, come closest, and the magpie lays a bridge between them. But what do these facts reveal? The next day, the group goes to the mountain where the festival will take place and finds 7 strangely shaped stones standing in the middle of a clearing. Later, Sachiko visits Nanmaru, wanting to see the boy's abilities. He punches a can, but it seems that the girl expected something different. In the evening, Emi suggests returning to Tokyo because she doesn't trust the locals. Meanwhile, the hotel owner makes a phone call, reporting that Nanmaru can make holes in objects. The next day, a young man whom Sachiko calls her brother and clearly fears enters her home, but the grandmother asks him to leave and never return. Nanmaru meanwhile goes to the cafe, and the owner reminds him that this village is his real home. The boy asks Sachiko to explain her comment about the man who can achieve, and she arranges to meet him. In the evening, the girl explains that in the town, 2 types of people with superpowers are born: achievers and window openers. There are only 5 of the former, including Nanmaru, but the latter are those worthy of becoming priests of Mount Murakami. The boy doesn't understand what's so exciting about this since the hole is so small, but the girl abruptly cuts him off. She just wants to live a normal life. After all, she is a window opener. Meanwhile, Sachiko's brother Takashi is walking among people and encounters some local guys. Emi notices a strange glow over the mountain. She and Tagai head there and see a group of people in white robes, dancing with torches in a clearing, summoning someone. Meanwhile, the guys beat Takashi and, pulling off his hat, see a stone embedded in his forehead. They leave him on the road. Emi and Tagai sneak closer to the dancers and see a masked man performing some kind of ritual. After the people leave, the pair approach the stones and realize there are only 6. It means that each day of the festival, 1 stone will disappear. At this moment, Takashi raises his hands and his attackers lose their legs. Another group of people in white arrives at the mountain. Meanwhile, a newspaper article is published about the outrage of local residents protesting the construction of a golf course on the mountain's peak, as this place is sacred to them. At this time, the people in white capture Emmy and Tagai, but she shouts the professor's name, and one of the men uncovers his face. It turns out to be the village head, who led the Tanabata ritual passed down through generations in the Murakami family. They apologize and ask her to describe what she saw. Emmy recounts the first group that had already been there. Returning to town, she asks the students to leave while she stays to find the professor, as she is sure he is alive. In the morning, Nanmaru says goodbye to Shichiko and exchanges emails with her. Later, Emmy sees the students off just as Takashi arrives at the hotel and realizes that the boy has left. Noticing that the hotel owner is making a call, he smashes the phone. He finds out the boy's address in Tokyo and leaves. He later finds Nanmaru at the club and begins teaching him how to use his power. He raises his hands and a sphere grows between his palms, which he calls a sphere beyond reality. It can easily dismember a person or another object. Nanmaru follows his advice and creates his first sphere. Seeing its size, Takashi runs for water and, trying to pour it over the sphere, breaks the bucket. He then convinces the boy that they are chosen. All of this is witnessed by Nanmaru's classmate, Aki. Later, Nanmaru writes to Sachiko, and she advises him to stay away from her brother. At the cafe in Morikawa, unknown men in black suits arrive, which the owner immediately reports to the town leader. He orders everyone to keep their mouths shut. On the same day, the professor calls Emmy, apologizes, and tells her that his window has opened. He assures her that he didn't kill anyone and says goodbye to her. In Tokyo, a meeting takes place with a politician who wants to run for a higher office. While he is speaking to the assembled crowd, a man with a masked face enters the university building and places his long-fingered hands against the wall. Suddenly, a huge black sphere appears on stage, right in front of the politician. The man reaches out to it, and his body is immediately sliced in half. Meanwhile, Emmy returns to Tokyo, and Nanmaru demonstrates his new abilities, which frightens his friends. After all, this is how the murder in Morikawa happened. That night, Sachiko visits her grandfather, who has round marks on his arms and a stone grows in his forehead. Meanwhile, the person who ordered the politician's murder, known as the Baron, watches the footage of the event and praises his subordinate for coming up with such a way to dispose of an undesirable person, but the murder in Morikawa was unnecessary. Therefore, he needs someone more obedient. That morning, Takashi comes to Nanmaru again to suggest that he participate in a project to train people in superpowers. A significant number of people attend this paid seminar. Under Takashi's guidance, Nanmaru demonstrates his power by smashing a metal statue. This causes unprecedented excitement among the audience. Nanmaru himself is delighted with the fee he received, unaware that Takashi and his accomplice, host Yokihara, earned hundreds of times more. The guys discuss Nanmaru's foolishness, not noticing that Aki is recording their conversation. That evening, the Baron is informed that one of the achievers lives in Tokyo. Meanwhile, Nanmaru notices a strange growth on his forehead. At the same time, Emmy continues studying the professor's papers and suddenly seems to see him. Murakami reminds her that Tanabata was first celebrated on April 29th, and so it has always been, but it's already May now. Emmy rushes to check the records and realizes that the dates have changed. In the Western Gregorian calendar, they coincide, including the very first, but this calendar was only introduced in 1582, and only in Catholic countries. But how could it have appeared in Morikawa? Meanwhile, Nanmaru continues participating in seminars, supposedly teaching people superpowers. The boy tries to explain that not everyone can do this, but no one believes him. Then Aki lets him listen to the recording she made. Nanmaru refuses to participate in the seminars, explaining that his power is not meant for deceit. Meanwhile, in Morikawa, Sachiko meets a masked man at her mother's grave, whom she calls Lord Yoriyuki Murakami. At the evening gathering, the town leader reports to Sachiko's grandfather about a group of outsiders looking for achievers in their town. He reminds them of the rules: no one should know the village's secret. The next day, Yoriyuki is brought to the Baron. The achiever demands that the village be left alone, but the Baron claps his hands and 4 armed men run out of the neighboring rooms. However, Yoriyuki is much faster, and all fall with pierced heads. He agrees to work temporarily for the Baron and removes the mask from his face. The Baron is horrified to see a completely inhuman face. Meanwhile, Nanmaru continues to look for a job where he could properly use his power. Suddenly, he hears calls for help. Passers-by have found a child in a locked car. They locate the mother, but she has lost her keys and cannot open the vehicle. Seeing the boy losing consciousness from the heat, Nanmaru uses his powers to smash the car's window. People are impressed, and the mother thanks the savior. Later, he sees a news report about the incident, but these same shots catch the attention of Takashi in Yokihara. They begin vandalizing the signs of establishments with problems. TV reports about them start to appear, raising social issues. Everyone discusses the unknown boy, whom they nickname Chisel. The police start an investigation. The Baron is displeased with the commotion, but Yoriyuki assures him that he knows who is responsible. Meanwhile, in Marikawa, people believe that Takashi is behind all this. Sachiko's grandfather and the professor ask the girl to go to Tokyo. Following his friend's advice, Nanmaru decides to become a janitor, thinking he could simply destroy the trash. However, the group soon notices that the mark on his forehead grows with each use of his power. One day, Sachiko arrives in Tokyo. She confesses to Emi that the town lied. The professor was there all along. Now he hands his assistant a letter of apology through Sachiko. She explains that all the town's residents have been having nightmares. Their conversation is interrupted by Namaru's arrival. The girl notices the mark on his forehead, but the boy doesn't understand her hints. He points out the place where Takashi might be. At another seminar where Takashi continues to deceive people, a delegation from the town arrives and demands that these activities stop. Takashi, pointing at Namaru, accuses the boy of wanting to monopolize the gift, and no matter how much Namaru yells trying to explain the truth, people don't listen. Then Sachiko steps forward. She accuses her brother of lying and calls him a killer. Takashi raises his hands as if preparing to create a sphere, but at that moment a loud pop is heard and a huge hole appears in the window. Yoriyuki, standing below, calls Takashi to him and the latter runs down. He orders Takashi to stop deceiving people, but the seminar attendees don't want that, so Yoriyuki instantly creates a massive sphere and blows off part of the roof. He explains that no one can develop this gift, even after thousands of years of training, and shows his hands. But upon noticing Nanmaru, he suddenly declares that the boy must be erased. Sachiko shields him with her body, and the blow strikes the ground. Later, the townspeople explain to Nanmaru that Yoriyuki Murakami would have been the ruler of the settlement in ancient times. Now he eliminates disobedient telekinetics. That's why he took Takashi away. Uncontrolled power is a threat to the village's existence. Nanmaru doesn't understand. Hasn't anyone ever used the gift for good? But he is abruptly cut off. Later, Sachiko and Nanmaru have dinner together, and he shows her Tokyo at night. Nanmaru receives his first job order for trash removal. That night, Sachiko asks for permission to stay with him. She explains that the village residents fear the dark side of the gift and shows Nanmaru her back, scarred and disfigured. The girl also shows him a family photo that includes Yoriyuki, who once looked like a normal person and loved her mother. However, according to village customs, the girl was married off to another. Her father couldn't accept that his children exhibited a weak power, constantly harassing his son and forcing him to train. Her mother, tired of the constant strife, asked Yoriyuki, who had become the mountain's priest, for help. He began training Takashi, who eventually created his first sphere. The boy started visiting the priest frequently, which didn't please his father. After gaining his gift, Takashi became aggressive and took out his anger on his little sister. When everyone was on the verge of breaking down, Sachiko began having dreams. One day she overheard an argument between her father and Takashi in the garden and caught her brother standing over her father's bloodied body. Takashi insisted he didn't do it, but their mother expelled him from the house. The grandfather and the village residents covered up the incident. One day her mother went to the mountain, asking the girl to bring Yoriyuki, who had already lost his human form. On the way she talked about her nightmares, but he confessed that everyone saw them. They reached the mountain, where her mother left this world. Afterward, Yoriyuki left the village, only returning when he learned that a developer wanted to desecrate the mountain. Takashi wouldn't have been able to do it, being too small-minded and self-centered. She's glad that Nanmaru sees the gift in a positive light. Meanwhile, the police start investigating the disappearance of their officers. One detective constantly recalls the incident on stage and meets Aki, who insists that the spatial sphere is no mere trick. Suddenly, Nanmaru suggests to his friends that they shut down the project, believing the gift is too great for mere trash removal. Later, he goes to see Emmi, who tells him that she found a few strange phrases about the solar years in the professor's letter. She compared the facts and realized that the village used a solar, not a Gregorian, calendar. During the festival, the solstice was always present. Thus, the Tanabata festival lasted 3 days before the solstice, 1 day during it, and 3 days after. Nanmaru later takes a job with a cleaning company. Meanwhile, Aki suggests that the detective team up with her to investigate the unexplained incidents. That night, Nanmaru has his first nightmare, where he falls into a void. Suddenly, he hears Sachiko screaming, begging him not to approach the other side. Ahead, he sees an opening door and wakes up. The next day, a car, a boat, and a plane disappear in the city. Aki and the detective track down Yoriyuki, who arrives to meet Takashi and warn him about the danger of opening windows. However, Aki and the detective are caught by the Baron's men. Yoriyuki then demonstrates the disappearance of a prominent politician right at the door of a nearby building. The guards drag in the bound Aki and the detective, but Yoriyuki leaves, not considering them important. Meanwhile, Nanmaru starts work, clearing old items from an office. Suddenly, he realizes that these items were precious to someone and have a history. He runs to the roof where the others are working and asks for permission to leave some things in the building. His co-worker agrees and begins asking Nanmaru about his abilities. At that moment, they see a massive sphere floating above the city. The next moment, it bursts and erases several buildings. It turns out Yoriyuki is doing this a few blocks away. Seeing the explosion, people mistake it for a terrorist attack. Panic ensues. Nanmaru runs with everyone else and suddenly finds himself in a field strewn with the bodies of medieval warriors. But before he can be scared, he returns to his time. Yoriyuki tells Takashi that he will soon put an end to the nightmares. Meanwhile, in the village, Sachiko hears an announcement about the disappearance of 200 people in the destroyed buildings. Her grandmother doesn't believe Yoriyuki did it. After all, he was the protector of the people, but many eyewitnesses saw the massive black sphere and no one else possesses such power. Sachiko asks her mother for help. Nanmaru continues having nightmares, where Sachiko begs him not to approach the windows, or else he will find himself on the other side. The next day, the government declares a quarantine and asks everyone to stay home. Meanwhile, in the village, people discuss the events, not believing that their Yoriyuki could have done such a thing. Meanwhile, the detective regains consciousness and finds that they are in some basement. Sachiko's grandfather contacts Emi, after which she decides to go to Markawa. Nanmaru finds Takashi in his room. He accuses him of killing people, but Takashi explains that Yoriyuki wants to end the nightmares. He suddenly asks the boy to do him a favor and convey his apologies to Sachiko. Nanmaru admits that his sister doesn't consider him a killer, and that turns out to be the most important thing for him. At the same time, Yoriyuki decides to break off the deal with the Baron and informs his bodyguard. Before leaving, Takashi gives Nanmaru a piece of paper with the address and plan of the place where Aki and the detective are being held. He goes there and arrives just as one of the bodyguards forces the detective to shoot Aki. But then the Baron calls, ordering him to come immediately. Nanmaru distracts the remaining guard by creating a sphere and tries to free the captives. However, there is another guard who points a weapon at him. The detective tries to interfere and the gun falls, wounding the guard. The men struggle and Nanmaru creates a sphere, preparing to send it at the guard. But Aki screams, the boy comes to his senses and he breaks through the wall. He frees the captives and leads them out. Later he notices that the stone in his forehead has grown and realizes that he almost killed someone recently. Meanwhile, Yoriyuki tells the Baron that he needs to experiment with the sphere's precision and flight range. After he leaves, the Baron realizes the danger of the monster and plans to go to the Prime Minister. But at that moment, the city center is engulfed by a giant sphere and a massive hole in the ground appears where the building stood. The next day, all channels broadcast news of the deaths of people in the newly formed craters. The government urges residents to stay home. However, Nanmaru goes to meet his friends, who are joined by Aki. Nanmaru recalls Yoriyuki's words about getting rid of the nightmare and promises to go all the way to find out what he meant. Gathering together, the group heads to Markawa, where they are met by Sachiko and a delegation of locals. Nanmaru recounts Yoriyuki's words about the nightmares, but none of the locals hurry to explain. Emi then sternly urges them to avoid another incident with the loss of lives. She wants to know what the windows are, why the Tanabata festival is needed, and what the role of the mountain priest is. However, the villagers admit that they don't understand Yoriyuki's plan. Nanmaru loses his temper. He respects the town's customs, but the power of the mountain kills, and Yoriyuki is a killer. The town leader promises to introduce the group to the master, Sachiko's grandfather. He also plans to invite Professor Murakami to the meeting. In the morning, Yoriyuki and Takashi arrive at the master's estate. The maid greets the guests and rushes to warn the master of the unexpected visitors. The old man immediately accuses Yoriyuki of killing the official, but Yoriyuki reminds him that the man wanted to destroy the sacred mountain by turning it into a golf course. Yoriyuki has found answers to his questions and is ready to break the rules. The pair are about to leave, but suddenly the visitor stops. He senses armed men hiding in the yard and prepares to fight. The Baron's men open fire, but the bullets don't touch Yoriyuki. The maid rushes to her master. Meanwhile, Nanmaru's group walks along the road leading to the estate. Sachiko tells Nanmaru that the locals fear him. Deep down, they are vassals. The town leader thanks Tagai for the model of their area, saying the professor told him it helped solve the problem. At this time, in the master's house, Yoriyuki distributes the exits to attack the enemy from different sides. Meanwhile, soldiers burst into the master's bedroom and open fire. Yoriyuki tears them apart with a sphere. Namaru's friends hear the shots and run to the estate. The Baron's assistant brings in reserve troops and orders the estate to be surrounded. Yoriyuki and Takashi are caught in a circle. They stand back to back, grow spheres, and kill the soldiers. Yoriyuki creates a whole bunch of spheres. One of the soldiers, dying, shoots Takashi. When Nanmaru's group arrives at the estate, they find a pile of bodies. The old master, dying, orders them to stop Yoriyuki. Namaru and Sachiko step into the yard as the Baron's men leave the estate. Yoriyuki is leading the wounded Takashi along the forest path, but the boy is getting worse. Eventually, he falls and dies. Namaru and Sachiko also find the forest path and soon see Takashi's body. Sachiko takes her brother's death hard. Meanwhile, Emi finds a handprint on the door with long fingers, belonging, according to legend, to the monster Kasasagi. Later, the group returns to the town, where they are unexpectedly stopped by Sachiko's grandmother, who asks Nanmaru to go with her, as she received an order from the new master, Professor Murakami, to protect the boy. He ends up at Sachiko's house. In the evening, the young people meet on the veranda. Sachiko asks him to be careful and offers sweet sake, which helps with nightmares. She believes that the dead turn into stars in the sky. The distance between them is vast. No matter how much you scream, no one will hear you, and the loneliest thing is your own death when you are the only one stepping out of the window. The girl talks about her nightmares where she is searching for someone. Unexpectedly, she finds herself on a mountain where she feels the presence of someone beyond the Milky Way, and they extend a hand to her. Namaru grabs her hand and confesses that Takashi regretted his behavior. Sachiko, however, hopes that her brother did not go into the darkness alone. That night, Emi struggles to sleep, replaying everything that happened in her mind. The next day, despite the police's order to stay indoors, the men of Marikawa arrange a meeting, not noticing that Aki is recording their conversation, which he later shows to Emi. The friends discover that there are no news reports anywhere about the massacre in the town and decide to go to the meeting. Meanwhile, the police knock on Sachiko's grandmother's door, searching for Nanmaru, but the girl leads him out through the back door. However, Nanmaru is convinced that the police are looking for Yoriyuki. In the evening, the residents on their way to the meeting are stopped by the police. A confrontation ensues, which Emi and her students observe. Then the Baron's men arrive, also seeking to capture Yoriyuki, but the residents refuse to hand over their priest. The Baron's assistant fires a shot over their heads, claiming that Yoriyuki possesses a terrifying power that could destroy the planet. At this point, Nanmaru intervenes, suggesting they meet with Yoriyuki first to let him explain his actions. When people start shouting again, he creates a sphere. Nanmaru admits that he doesn't know why he has such abilities, but there can be no talk of betrayal by the town. Then Professor Murakami steps out from the crowd. Emi is horrified to see the enormous stone in his forehead and faints. Namaru is at a city council meeting. He asks them to agree that he will convince Yoriyuki to talk to the police and the Baron's men. Guards will wait for him on the mountain to persuade him to leave the town without harming its residents. Later, he informs his friends that the professor wants to meet with them in his laboratory. In the morning, the team goes to Murakami. They gather around the model, and the professor begins his explanation. The village festival was established and held for 7 days during Tanabata, the summer solstice. In Chinese history, from which this festival originated, it symbolized a magpie that bridged the Milky Way. It was also on the Lord's flag, but it turns out that magpies didn't exist in Japan at that time, so it must have been something similar. The professor asks Tagai to help him, smears his hand with ink, and asks him to make a handprint. He then shows Yoriyuki's handprint left at the master's estate and aligns them in a specific order. The group immediately recalls the Lord's emblem in the Marikawa Museum. It looks as though a long-fingered hand is passing a sphere to a human hand. The professor asks them to look at the model. Tagai immediately notices that the mountains seem artificial and that Tanabata takes place on the solstice days when a second sunset can be seen. Murakami simulates the sunset during the solstice, and the group is surprised to see 2 hands and a black sphere between them in the mountainous landscape. The professor marvels at the unknown master's creation, an enormous earth sculpture spanning several kilometers. One might consider that it was created by the Kasasagi, who appeared in this area, perhaps from the sky. How would people have reacted to this? After all, according to the peasants' beliefs, the entire land was inhabited by gods, and they couldn't always distinguish between good and evil. The Kasasagi, who became gods to them, began visiting this planet regularly, as mentioned in many tales and legends. And if you look at Mount Murakami, you can see that it resembles a helicopter landing pad, so the festival torches served as guiding lights. The festival itself began as a ceremony to welcome the gods during the summer solstice, but at some point, the Kasasagi stopped appearing. Yet for thousands of years, people continued to meet them, even though they never came. However, the town became trapped in its beliefs. Invisible chains keep the initiates in one place. Fear and loneliness are what lie beyond the window, and the window openers have to wait for the Kasasagi. The professor and Sachiko are among those the visitors learned to reach thousands of years ago, using their minds. The large flag on the mountain most likely symbolizes loyalty and a reminder that one should not leave this earth. For this, fear is instilled in the window openers. That's why the locals have protected this mountain for every era. It's hard to believe, but it's unknown whether the Kasasagi will ever return. They may have died long ago. The next morning, the guards on the mountain come out for breakfast, and later Emmy and her students arrive. The professor is concerned about their well-being and suggests they all go to the city, but Nanmaru refuses. He feels obligated to be the first to meet Yoriyuki. Murakami supports his decision as the townspeople need protection. Each generation of priests has ingrained the sacred duty into their minds, but the professor is the only one who thought to create a model and can now visually show people what is really happening here. They light bonfires to show Yoriyuki that there are people here. After all, he most likely wants to destroy the mountain. That would end everything, but the people are becoming hostages. In the evening, the students and Nanmaru go on watch. The boy asks Sachiko about her dreams and suggests they leave this place to start a new life. Moreover, he feels something for her. At that moment, the Baron's men appear. They haven't waited for Yoriyuki and demand to know where he is, otherwise they'll start killing the townspeople. The professor is outraged and even creates a sphere, but then one of the Baron's soldiers shoots his comrades and removes his helmet, revealing himself to be Yoriyuki. Those who haven't seen his form before scream in fear. The Baron's assistant tries to shoot him and immediately dies from a sphere. Yoriyuki admits that he always imagined the black sphere as a trash chute. He simply pushed those who posed a threat to the village into it. But now, he doubts that. The ancestors, the Kasasagi, might have contacted their descendants many times, but most of them didn't develop the ability to leave with them unharmed. He believes that his ancestors were from other stars. They possessed knowledge and logic foreign to Earthlings. But what if it's not a window but a gate? And by entering the sphere, you can be transported to the ancestors' planet? That's why he changed his plans. At that moment, people see a huge black sphere above their heads. Yoriyuki announces that he intends to leave with the Kasasagi. Sachiko suddenly asks him to take her with him. The dark world is calling to her, and she wants to find peace. Nanmaru reminds her of her dreams. The girl reaches out, and through the darkness, she sees an inhuman hand beckoning her from another reality. But just as she is about to grasp it, Nanmaru grabs her wrist. Yoriyuki shakes his head. Nanmaru will never understand the feelings of the window openers. The boy agrees, but he doesn't like that the girl is ready to go into the afterlife without experiencing even a small part of this vast world. Here there is wisdom, mistakes, and attempts to start over. The world is thousands of years old, and compared to that, all superpowers are insignificant. He doesn't want her to leave and asks her to stay. The girl agrees. She remembers how her mother once left for the sphere. Yoriyuki also recalls that moment and promises to wait for her. The sphere begins to grow, and Nanmaru orders everyone to run. The people rush down the mountain while Yoriyuki stands under the sphere, waiting for it to consume him. A massive explosion occurs. Nanmaru's team manages to take cover in the forest, and the town's electricity goes out. Time passes. Tagai enrolls in graduate school. Emmy and Murakami resign from the department and now live together in Marikawa. Aki has become an independent internet journalist and now lives with the former policeman. The people of Marikawa quickly reconstructed the area where the mountain once stood. Nanmaru has opened a company where people exchange items without using money. It's strange but highly successful. He no longer uses his abilities, which means his appearance will remain unchanged. One day he goes to Marikawa, where a festival is scheduled to take place in the evening. After all, the festival continues in the hope that someone will come from the Milky Way, and Sachiko lives in her house, always waiting for Nanmaru. The series is based on the manga by Hitoshi Iwaki, the author of the famous Parasite. While the middle of the plot may drag a bit, the finale ties everything together and thoroughly explains the events on screen, which is a rare feat in modern cinema.